I'm going to try and give as much information here, but not make it run on too much. I will say that the locations will be vague and names changed because this does involve my family, and I'd rather just not put all that information out there. Otherwise, this is something that affected my family heavily, but also many others that were in the neighborhood. I grew up in a pretty small town with probably no more than a few thousand people in it. When I say everyone knew everyone in their business, it was no joke or exaggeration. I remember when something happened at my dad's work, and he would have to rush home just to tell my mom before she found out because she was likely to be on the phone getting the details from one of her friends if my dad wasn't fast enough. Honestly, that's one of the main reasons I stayed out of trouble at school. I messed up one time in class and thought that I could get away with not telling them exactly what happened, but they already knew everything before I even walked into the house. This is just to give you an idea of the size of this town and how fast word travels. Because of its small size, there really weren't any choices in regards to career and family, unless you wanted to be a car mechanic or a receptionist, or maybe staff at the only elementary school in the area. And needless to say, I couldn't wait to leave. After I graduated, I left and really only ever returned for holidays or those random visits per my parents' requests. They still lived in the same house where I grew up, never moving, never even considering it. It was a 2-bedroom home, and when my little sister came around, I was moved to the basement. It was at least finished and had a door, so it's not like they kept me locked in a dirty dungeon. Every time I visited, the town looked the exact same, like it was frozen in time. All the houses were just slightly more run down with each visit. But then, when my dad died suddenly of a heart attack, I had to take leave of absence from my job to help my mom and settle his affairs. He wasn't in the best of health, but he also wasn't even close to knocking on death's door. He also never had any heart conditions, so it was completely unexpected and hard on all of us. My sister had moved all the way across the country to California, so she was planning on being there for the funeral, but wasn't sure when she would be there prior and how long after. But what was supposed to be a 2-week visit stretched into nearly 3 months. And I started noticing things about my hometown that I'd been too young or self-absorbed to see before. One of the first things I noticed, and yes, I did notice it each time, was the drugstore near the edge of town. The sign was always big and in good shape. The windows clean and covered with ads, stickers, and other window clings. It was there for as long as I can remember. It was owned by an older man when I was younger, but then his son, I'll call him Dave, took over sometime after I moved out. The place always looked great, and I always thought that it stood out from the rest of the town. There was an old mill that basically kept the town running when my parents were younger, but it closed down shortly after my sister was born, which affected most of the people in town. Someone in your family worked there, and mine was included. My dad and grandfather both worked there when it closed. He was forced to find another job as a car mechanic. My mother then got a job at the elementary school as a lunch lady. At least I was in middle school by that point, so everyone was just trying to keep their heads above water. Multiple small businesses were closed, and buildings were boarded up, but the pharmacy was always thriving. I remember mentioning it to my mom one night, trying to make a joke, and she just shrugged and said they do well because everyone gets sick and needs medicine, and then changed the subject. I thought it was odd, but just reminded myself that she probably wasn't in the best headspace. Then came my dad's funeral. People came and gave their condolences, but it was the other conversation that had me really concerned. Dave, from the pharmacy, was there, and even came over to talk to us. I will never forget the way he hugged my mom and how stiff she was during it. He then told her that if there was anything he could do to help, to reach out, and she just nodded. Exactly what could he possibly do? And why did she seem so nervous around him? But then, walking around and talking to the people that I did remember, I heard people talking about Dave, and how this RX helped with that, and Dave was even talking to others about prescriptions. I was confused, but even more, I was pissed. It was like people were doing their business, completing their errands at my father's funeral. It felt completely disrespectful to me. But I didn't feel like it was my place to say anything, so I left it alone, but knew that I was going to hold a grudge on Dave because of it. About 2 weeks after the funeral, I was helping my mom go through my dad's stuff. He had turned the spare bedroom into a makeshift office and storage room, and my mom was ready to get rid of his tools and other things. AKA, I was going to end up taking some stuff home. I went to pull stuff out of the closet and found a small banker's box filled with different pill bottles. Most of them were empty, but some of them still had pills in them. The labels all showed that they were prescriptions made out for my dad for multiple hardcore painkillers. I'm not going to list them here for obvious reasons. I was shocked. I had no idea that he was on any of these or that he was in that much pain. I know he messed himself up from work in the mill, but I didn't know it was to this extent. Enough so that he was taking all of these. I brought the box to the living room, and I asked my mom about it. She barely looked over at the box when she said it was for my dad's back problems. I told her that there was enough in there to stock a small hospital, with each bottle holding 60 to 90 pills. I also pointed out the dates because he was getting multiple prescriptions filled at the same time from different doctors. One doctor would not give him this many prescriptions, so the fact that he was going to different doctors was a bigger problem for me. My mom then made a comment that didn't make sense. She just said that Dave did his best to take care of your father. But Dave could only fill prescriptions. He didn't write them. What did he have to do with it? The incident at the funeral and then this was enough for me to ask questions. So, I went and asked Dave about it. I went to the pharmacy with that box to ask what the hell he had to do with all of this. I asked someone else that worked there for him, and he came out and immediately escorted me to a small room in the back. He asked about the box, and I opened it and showed him all the pills. I asked him what the hell this was, and he tried to say the same thing my mom did, that he was helping my dad. I was pretty angry and said that if these were all being filled by him, then he was a piss-poor pharmacist, because he was on way too many pills at once. That was dangerous, and I wasn't convinced that it wasn't what led to his death. Dave did not take that well, and said that he helped my dad, that he took care of everyone in the town, and that I needed to watch what I said. Something about the way he said that made the hair on my neck stand. That sounded like a threat. I took the box with me and left. I tried asking a friend of mine that was working at one of the car shops still, and he refused to talk about it. He was vague and tried to change the subject. When I brought it up to my mom again, she had tears in her eyes when she told me to just drop it. It was more like she was pleading, rather than asking, and that scared me. What the hell was going on that people didn't want to talk about? I even reached out to another friend that had moved away. They stayed there after high school to help with their mom, and she wasn't doing good, but when she passed, she finally left. Or so I thought that was what happened. After talking to her, she explained that when she filled her mom's prescriptions at Dave's pharmacy, he offered her something that was supposed to help with her anxiety. However, it was just another pain pill. After her mom died, she had spiraled even further, and she quickly got addicted to those pills to the point that it nearly killed her. I was livid. Not only did he have no care for the prescriptions he filled, but he was obviously just giving out pills that weren't prescribed. What were the odds that he could have done something like that to my dad, and that could have led to his death, too? But my friend warned me that it wasn't worth pushing. She said that I should get my mom to leave and just never come back. Her reasoning? The cop that saved her when she OD'd was from a different town, as she had been out with friends. She told them everything, and they actually started an investigation into Dave's, trying to prove that he was more of a dealer than a pharmacist. However, the detective that was working on it actually went missing. There was a text message typed on his phone about, quote, leaving. It was left in his car on the side of the road, and there was no indication of where he went. Some people say he must have fallen over the ledge that his car was on, but not even his body was found. That was pretty eerie in and of itself. What was Dave capable of, or willing to do? Was he involved in this disappearance? Even the sheriff in that little town was in Dave's pockets, so I knew he wasn't going to do anything about it either. That kept me up all night. I didn't know if there was anything I could, or should, do. Or if I should just get my mom out of there. I confronted Dave already. Would he try to do something to my mom? I was afraid that this whole town was wrapped up in this, and that she would be a target because of me. So, the next day, I did everything I could to convince my mom to move. I offered her a room at my place, but she wouldn't bite. Then, a few days later, there was a brick thrown through my mom's front bay window. This was midday. Who would do that without any fear of someone catching them? I wasn't there when it happened either, as I had left to go get something. My mom was terrified. While I hated seeing my mom in tears like that, it did finally convince her that she may not be safe there. She spoke to her sister, who lived in between my mom's house and mine, and she agreed to stay with her for the time being. We did our best to keep to ourselves as we finished cleaning out her home, taking what was important to her, and we just left. I offered to do all the work for her to sell it, but she wasn't convinced anyone would buy it with the work that it needed anyways. I got her to my aunt's with no further issue, but I did look into things more once we were back home and safe. I learned that there were several other people that had died in the town for other suspicious reasons. There was my old English teacher who died from a supposed overdose on sleep meds. Someone I had gone to school with had died, and 3 former mill workers who also died from complications of chronic pain. I get that it could be a real thing, but it was just a really bad feeling. Knowing what I did about my old friend and my dad, I ended up leaving an anonymous tip to some drug line. I don't remember. I was just hoping that someone could investigate it further with backup so they didn't go missing too. This was all back in 2011, so it's been quite some time ago, but unfortunately, I haven't heard anything about that town. I don't know anyone that lives there now, as my only friend that was still there eventually left too. And most of the older people that I know had also passed. Or I just had no way of communicating with them. I haven't been contacted by anyone either, but I know I tipped them off anonymously, so I'm not surprised. I'm honestly just waiting for the day to read something about them arresting him. But I also worry that they may be running out of time. Come to think of it, I've had some interesting stories happen to me over the years, and I haven't shared many of them. Mainly because I didn't have anyone around me who cared to hear about them. My previous stories were from friends or situations that I was close to, but this one is directly about something that involved me, for a change. If I had to give this a name, I would call this story The Hitman Got It Wrong, because it involves myself, a landlord, my ex, and what I could only describe as the weirdest hitman I have ever known. In late 2017, I finally had enough of my ex, who was rude, unsupportive, and all around a negative person, and thus, despite my best efforts, made me a negative and quite depressed person as well. When I finally had enough, I told my ex how I felt, and how my ex made me feel, and we broke things off before we were to be married in a few months. My ex spent all of her money on stuff for the wedding, even though I told her not to because we needed the money for bills and rent. But once we broke it off, she told her friend that I owed her thousands of dollars. This began the prank calls and the taunting. Someone broke into my apartment, stole my computer, my instruments, and my music production equipment. But nothing could be done because my ex let her friends steal my stuff, and the police said that I couldn't file charges without proof that it was stolen, or get warrants to search their houses for my stuff. So I was a bit irritated, but what got me was what happened next. I worked part-time as a martial arts instructor, and I usually put my phone and other belongings in my locker when on the mat. But there was a Thursday afternoon in April 2018 that I didn't put my phone away. I got a phone call during my off-mat period from an unknown number, and all I heard was the stereotypical breathing. And me, being the ass-kicking, well-trained fighter I was, answered back, "Either start talking or get a breathing treatment." I said this, to which the random person replied, "Look outside." The only problem here was that there were several cars in the parking lot, since the martial arts school I taught at was in the shopping strip, but it didn't matter either way because the random caller hung up. Later that night, after classes, I got another call, this time from my ex's best friend, demanding that I do the right thing and replace the supposed $3,000 I supposedly caused my ex to waste on our not-happening wedding, to which I replied that I didn't owe her money that I told her not to spend. She told me that either I pay up, or she escalates things to bringing in what she called additional support, to get the money from me. And I told her to screw off and blocked her. About a day later, one of my students' moms, who knew my ex and her family, told me that she had seen her recently and that she had been joking about hiring someone to off me. To which I finally realized that Mr. Breather from a day ago was probably some friend of theirs they talked into trying to intimidate me. But just to be sure, I let my boss at the martial arts school know that someone was potentially being talked into harassing me, just in case, and then I went home. That is when things started getting weird. At the time, I lost my apartment thanks to my ex taking money out of my account, so I couldn't pay rent, and had began renting a room from an older gentleman in the area who was very loud, very political, and also had the only room in the area cheap enough and available for me to move into. He spent most of his days working from home as a network supervisor, and often hung out in political chat rooms, which often fueled his chaotic rants and long one-sided conversations he would often rope me into when he could. Anyways, I came home to him ranting over the phone about something political and went upstairs immediately to my room, where I realized I had several texts from an unknown number. They were all photos of me at work, taken through the front picture windows of the martial arts school that I worked at. Part of me was getting a little uneasy at this point, and then I got a text simply stating, "We know where you work, and we know where you live. Pay up or pay the consequences." I didn't bother replying to the text and blocked the number. A few minutes later, my phone began to ring and I didn't answer. It rang back to back for hours, almost all night. And then I finally got another photo text from yet another random number. This one was a photo of the front of the house that I stayed at. I didn't really know what to do this time, but I was starting to get pissed because I was now dealing with my phone being assaulted with phone calls and texts from random numbers. I do remember looking out my room window on the second floor and seeing a black car with dark windows slow rolling down the street, but I wasn't sure if it was whomever was harassing me. The next day, I went to work as usual and kept my phone on silent because I still had to deal with random chain texts demanding payment or sending photos of me. And I let my boss know once again that someone was spending a lot of time trying to harass me on behalf of my ex, to which my boss just said to ignore and block the numbers. But after about a week of this, things came to a head. I remember it was a Friday evening, and I contemplated going to a movie to get some air, but ultimately just went to the local game store and got some games and junk food, and decided to watch movies all night at home. When I left, my landlord was yelling at someone about something and ended with saying, "Oh yeah? You want to come say that to my freaking face? I live at address, and you can come over here and say that crap." And I remember that it caught me off guard because the address that he gave was actually the house around the corner. Odd, but then again, I didn't care. I remember I walked past someone up near the front of the neighborhood while I was walking to the store there, and I made a mental note that the person was wearing headphones, a black hoodie, and black sweatpants just like I was. On the way back from the store, I heard several sirens and saw a handful of police cars, followed by an ambulance, enter the neighborhood, heading towards where I was going. The closer I got, the more afraid I became, and once I arrived on my street, I noticed that the police had the street blocked off and a crowd of people were standing around. It took me a minute to realize that there were two different things happening at once. The house around the corner had the ambulance, and several police cars at it. And it took me a minute to realize that the front of the house has a giant hole in it, and a minivan had driven into the front living room. I stood for a while and looked around, and one of the bystanders eventually told me from what they got, the minivan driver hit someone with their van, and then lost control and plowed into the front of the house. The police were also interviewing people, and I wanted to get home, but an officer stopped me when I was walking up to the house that I was renting a room at, and asked me if I knew anything. I told him I had been at the store at the time and was just returning home. He asked if I saw anything or anyone suspicious, and I told him that I didn't. Just the other guy in the hoodie who was walking back. I asked if they interviewed that guy since he probably saw more than I did. The officer then gave me a stern look. "Actually, the young man you're referring to was hit by the van around the corner," the officer told me. I do remember how chaotic it was for the rest of the night, and I didn't really get back on the phone until much later. My landlord was unusually silent and seemed shocked at the entire ordeal, but I felt more confused than anything. I never connected what happened with the chaotic situation with what I was dealing with until I got a visit from the officers the following day, who said they had recovered the phone of the deceased driver of the minivan, and my number was one of the last that he had been texting. And the driver had apparently been using different VoIP numbers to contact me after I would block a number. The officers asked me about it, and they wanted insight on what all the messages meant. So, I told them the whole story about what happened with my ex, the threats, and the fact that I was being harassed by someone that I assumed was a friend of hers pretending to be a hitman, and that a friend of hers told me that my ex was joking about hiring said hitman. They asked for my ex's information as well as the number of her friend who called me and had me make a formal statement. The young man who was hit by the van died at the scene along with the van driver, but from what the officers could gather, they didn't think it was an accident. According to what the officer told me next, one of the witnesses with the Ring doorbell said that the van intentionally drove up the sidewalk to hit the young man, and then lost control and plowed into the front of the house across the street from them. I don't really know how the van driver died, just that the police said he did. And this was in 2017, before every house in the neighborhood had a Ring or some kind of video-enabled doorbell device. That was the last I heard about the case. And even though I had no idea if the hitman was actually a legit one, I haven't heard from my ex in years, and the harassment stopped, and I moved out of the house that I was renting a room in and found a new place across town. Oh, and my former landlord had a nervous breakdown because he thought that he was the reason that a random man from the internet drove his car into his neighbor's house, since he gave the wrong address on purpose during an angry call over Facebook Messenger. I didn't bother to correct him about anything. All I know is that the hitman got it wrong. Case 1. Teresa Davidson Murphy's story. In 1999 in Rainier, Oregon, 34-year-old Teresa Davidson was living with her second husband, Richard, and her 13-year-old daughter, Jessica. On October 7th, she dropped Jessica off at a friend's house for a 3-day sleepover, with plans to pick her up on Sunday, October 10th. On this same day, her husband Richard said that he was leaving to go for a solo camping trip for a few days. On Saturday the 9th, Teresa's stepbrother Chris and her daughter Jessica both received strange phone calls from Teresa. In an interview, Chris said that Teresa was alluding to issues with Richard's behavior and spoke about relationship problems. He also pointed out that she was speaking in hushed tones, as if someone were with her and she did not want them to overhear. Jessica also said that she noticed her mother did not sound like herself. While she was supposed to pick up Jessica the next day on the 10th of October, Teresa never showed up. At her home were most of her belongings, including her vehicle, with the keys still in the ignition, but no sign of Teresa herself. In the 26 years since, no signs of the missing mother, nor clues to her whereabouts have ever come to light. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Teresa was living in Rainier, Oregon, with her second husband, a man by the name of Richard Murphy. She had 2 children from her previous marriage, a son named Justin who lived with his father several hours away, and her daughter Jessica. Prior to moving to Rainier, Teresa had been living in Puyallup, Washington, and was reportedly unhappy with the move, saying that she missed her old life in Washington and hated being so far from places and people that she knew. Jessica had a very close relationship with her mother, and considered her as a best friend. Even Teresa's own mother said Jess and Terry were inseparable most of the time. Teresa was close to her stepbrother Chris, and had actually lived with him for a time in Northern California, before moving to Washington State. While in Washington State, Teresa began to date a man that worked for Boeing, and he helped Teresa to improve her life by getting her GED, and even a job at Boeing prior to the couple separating. It was after this that Teresa moved to Puyallup. On that fateful day in October of 1999, Jessica says that her mother dropped her off at Richard's cousin's house, as Jessica and the cousin's daughter played volleyball together and were traveling to Washington for a game. October 7th was the last time she saw her mother, and October 9th was the last time she spoke to her. On the 10th, when Teresa was supposed to be picking her up, she never showed. Jessica was left with Richard's cousin for a week before he returned from his camping trip and came to get her. According to Jessica, when she questioned Richard about her mother's whereabouts, all he would say is that her mother had simply left. Richard told Jessica that he had called the hospitals in the area and the police, but had not filed a missing persons report. Again, at the house remained Teresa's belongings, including her truck with the key in the ignition. Jessica has said that when Richard finally came to get her, that something that struck her as odd was the fact that his large white work van, which was never clean, was spotless, with nothing more than a rain jacket inside. Another thing she quickly caught on to was the way Richard was speaking so derogatorily about Teresa, speculating what she was out doing, or, more accurately, accusing her. Not long after getting her from his cousin's house, Richard told Jessica that she could stay with him, but it was going to cost him a lot of money to take care of her. Or he said that she should contact her biological father and go stay with him. Jessica chose to contact her father, and then shortly afterward, she joined her father and older brother in Klamath Falls, Oregon. As Jessica was preparing to leave, if she tried to take something that was her mother's, Richard would act very strange, and would make her leave it, saying things like, "Oh, she's gonna need these whenever she gets back." Jessica has also told interviewers that Teresa's truck was initially found down the road from the house, but that by the time Richard came to get her, the truck was in the driveway. Furthermore, she states that the only significant possession of her mother's that was unaccounted for was her mother's gun. Richard's alibi for the time that Teresa disappeared is that he was on a solo camping trip which he left for on the 7th of October, the same day Jessica went to the sleepover. The 9th was the last time Jessica spoke to her mother by phone. However, she has her doubts about Richard ever going camping, as when she arrived back home, she noticed that all the camping gear was completely untouched, and in the same spot that it had been prior to the alleged camping trip. One of the biggest mysteries of this case is whether Richard really did go camping or not. Jessica doubts the validity of his alibi, but Teresa had also mentioned this camping trip to her mother before she went missing. Yvonne says that Teresa wanted to join him in this trip, but Richard refused and said that he was going alone. Yvonne also pointed out that it has yet to be proven to any degree of satisfaction that he actually went on this trip at all. Marissa Jones of the Vanished podcast reached out to Oregon police to ask if they had ever found any evidence that he had indeed gone camping, but they declined to comment, and also refused a request for Teresa's case file. When further asked about the time frame when Teresa first went missing, Yvonne said that she had received a phone call from Richard saying that Teresa had taken off with her gun, but that he wasn't worried about it as she can take care of herself. The couple of times she called Richard after that, she said that she asked to speak to Jessica, but that Richard wouldn't let her. Among her other unanswered questions are why her keys were left in the truck. Also, while Teresa's truck was registered in her name, somehow after her disappearance, Richard sold the truck. She also reiterates that the only belongings of Teresa's that were never accounted for are the clothes that she was wearing when she vanished and her pistol. Jessica feels that Richard absolutely had something to do with her mother's disappearance, or at least some kind of knowledge about what happened to her. It was only a month or a month and a half that Teresa had been missing when Richard brought his new girlfriend into the picture. And while he and Teresa had only been married for a little over a year, this definitely comes off as a huge red flag. Allegedly, he put all of Teresa's belongings into a storage unit and then never paid the bill on it. And so, since then, all of her things have been auctioned off, denying her family of even having a little piece of her, or at least the things that she held dear. It wasn't until October 23rd, 1999, that Teresa's sister-in-law filed the official missing persons report. At the time of this writing, it has been over 25 years since Teresa was last seen alive by anyone, and no definitive clues have ever surfaced as to what happened to her, or where she went. The gun, too, is, to this day, unaccounted for. If you have any information on the disappearance of Teresa Davidson Murphy, or the missing gun, please do contact the Crime Stoppers of Oregon. Hello, Raven. I originally found you on YouTube and was so happy to discover that you have a podcast since I listen to them at work. I love your content. Thank you. So, anyway, this happened to me and my boyfriend at the time, about 8 years ago. We decided to take a trip to Estes Park, Colorado one winter. We rented a cozy little cabin for a few days. The first night we were in there, we settled in at the cabin and went to dinner at a quiet restaurant with a huge window looking out at a dark, woodsy area while the snow fell. It was beautiful, but kind of spooky, if that makes sense. We continued on to the famous and haunted Stanley Hotel that was Stephen King's inspiration for the book The Shining. We had booked a couple of tickets for the latest ghost tour that night, about 10 p.m., I believe. We went all over the hotel. Well, the tour guide told stories about the hotel and described a lot of the haunting experiences people had had. I was an avid picture taker at this point, and I brought my camera everywhere. I was snapping picture after picture. I'll describe some of these photos later. After the tour, we went back to the cabin and sat in the bed watching a little TV before we went to sleep. I closed the bedroom door because I always do that. Not sure why. But since I was a teenager, I've always closed my bedroom door when it's time to sleep. I fell asleep almost immediately while my boyfriend sat up watching TV for a while. Soon after falling asleep, I woke up to knocking. I sat up in bed and looked towards the bedroom door. The knocking was on the bedroom door. I know it was, because the door was getting hit so hard that it was shaking in the frame with each knock. I was so out of it and still half asleep, so I simply said, "Someone's knocking at the door." My boyfriend called out, "Hello? Who's there?" But the knocking just continued, shaking the door. It probably only lasted for about 20 seconds, but it felt so much longer. I lay down and went back to sleep like nothing weird had happened. In the morning, I woke up and this memory immediately came back to me. Since I was half asleep, I asked my boyfriend for confirmation. "Hey, did someone knock on our bedroom door last night?" And he had a horrified look on his face and said, "Yeah, the door was literally shaking in the frame." I asked him what he did. He said, "Well, you were half asleep and seemed completely unconcerned, and I was freaked out, so I just ignored it and eventually fell asleep." The logical thing to do was to check the doors, so I got up and checked the front door. It was locked. I checked the sliding glass back door, and it was also locked. No one could have gotten in last night, and nothing was stolen or moved or anything. I told him, "Well, if it happens again tonight and I'm sleeping, wake me up so I can investigate." He said, "Investigate? You mean open the door?" And then I said yes. He then continued, "And let it in?" I laughed and said, "Sorry to burst your bubble, Jesse, but if it's a ghost, it won't be held by the confines of that door anyway." It didn't happen again the next 2 nights that we stayed there, and when I got home, I finally decided to go through the photos that I took at the haunted hotel. I was shocked to see orbs everywhere. Not tiny ones that could be dust or bugs, but large ones. There were ones that were green and appeared to glow. They were perfect circles, with the edge glowing the brightest and the middle was slightly transparent. They were invisible to the naked eye. At one point during the tour, I took a photo of my boyfriend, and this one freaked me out the most. He was surrounded by glowing orbs. Some just specks, some were large, glowing ones about the size of my fist, and one was half the size of his head. My camera would autofocus and never had any issues. However, in this photo, the orbs, although invisible to the naked eye, were so prominent that the camera focused on the orbs, which were crystal clear, and my boyfriend was fuzzy and out of focus. I think that I still have these photos on one of my many memory cards and photo CDs, and when I have some time, I'm going to go through them. If I can find them, I'll add them to this post. I honestly think that something followed us from the haunted Stanley Hotel back to our cabin that night. I wish I had fully woken up and gotten up to see what was going on. I'll never know what truly happened, but I will never forget what happened that night. Hi, Raven. I found your channel a few months ago, and your glitch videos are a regular bedtime routine for me now. My story is, however, paranormal in nature, and only just happened on February 23rd. I live at home with mom and younger brother. Last night, my brother was working a night shift, so not at home, and my mom was in her own room fast asleep. I went to bed late, around 3 a.m., and I woke up to the sound of the coffee table in my room being dragged towards my bed at around 4 in the morning. I woke up startled and put out my hand to stop the coffee table and couldn't help but shout, "What the hell?" The room was dark, so I couldn't see clearly or see anything, but I got up and switched the light on. The door was closed and nobody was around or awake in the house. The next day, I was thinking to myself, that was definitely not a dream, but then started doubting myself. Surely it wasn't some sort of paranormal activity out of nowhere. I wasn't even 100% convinced that such a thing really existed. However, I tell my brother lightheartedly about what happened, and we were kind of joking about it until later on when I told my mom, and it suddenly dawned on her that it was her late mother's 26th anniversary. I'm now convinced that this was not a vivid dream and not a coincidence. My grandmother was very close to my mom and would be in our house daily when I was young. My mom told me that it would have been around the same time in the early hours of the morning that her mom, my grandmother, passed away. I hope this was just a friendly hello from my granny, but I can't help but feel a little freaked out. Wish me luck falling asleep again tonight. Also, I remember that I used to love asking my granny to tell me ghost stories, as she knew loads of them, and was a great storyteller. First story, the Wahila. It just wouldn't be a proper video without at least one scary creature mentioned now, would it? The Wahila is a wolf-like creature that is said to be as large as a bear. It is said to inhabit northern Michigan, Ontario, and Alaska. 3.5 to 4 foot tall at its shoulders, the Wahila is said to have shorter legs than front legs, and its footprints are said to show wide-spaced toes. It's built more heavily and larger than other wolves in the area. I think this is one of the most interesting cryptids I've come across in a while, and it's very frustrating that I've not been able to find many stories relating to it. However, here is what I was able to learn about this fascinating bear dog. The creature is prominent in Native American lore of the region, and is often portrayed as an evil spirit that kills people by removing their heads. Given its reputation as something of a headhunter, it should come as no surprise that it's said to be native to the Nahanni, or Headless Valley. Although it's not just natives who have claimed to have had encounters with this apex predator. An auto mechanic by the name of Frank Graves reported seeing the beast and described it as a wolf on steroids. Later on, Graves would be quoted as identifying the creature as a timber wolf. It's been theorized that this creature is an amphicyanid, or perhaps a dire wolf, but again, these are just theories. It is also said that the Wahila is a solitary predator, never traveling in packs. Possibly due to its size and the lack of any natural predators, the creatures don't feel the need to find safety in a pack. The dark origin of the name Wahila allegedly comes from a pre-colonial account in which 3 trappers had a fatal encounter with the phantom-like giant white wolf. A popular story surrounding an encounter with the Wahila tells of a hunter out in the wilderness where he encounters a monstrous white wolf with glowing eyes. Unsettled by this looming creature, the hunter continues about his business, only to come upon the headless corpse of a fellow trapper nearby. Most stories and sightings of the Wahila come to us from Canada, specifically the Nahanni Valley. There are accounts of a hunter tracking and attempting to shoot a Wahila, only for the beast's dense white fur to have protected it from the projectile. And while Canada may well be the beast's home and native land, there have been sightings of the Wahila in Alaska, Michigan, and even the Kansas City area. From the distant pre-colonial days, all the way up to the 21st century, there are still sightings of these solitary beasts in two countries. A bear dog, a direwolf. Right now it's difficult to classify exactly the Wahila might be. It does seem to be one of the more plausible, or explainable, of many of the modern cryptids that have taken up residence in modern lore. After all, people thought the platypus was a mere myth, but now we all know otherwise. This is actually a very interesting creature that I was saddened I could find so little on. So, I'm going to make a request on behalf of my friend Raven here, hey, that's me, and ask you, dear audience, to send us, specifically Raven, any stories you may have about possible Wahila sightings. I agree with this. As an aside, during my research into this particular creature, I was looking deeper into the Wahila sightings in the Kansas City area, and immediately realized that the Wahila sightings that were actually being referred to in the KC area are Wahila Sea mountain bikes. So, beyond one mention of a sighting in the Kansas City area in the same breath as those of the actual Wahila referred to in the stories of the bloodthirsty direwolf/bear dog from the Nahanni Valley and Michigan, the sightings in the Kansas City area circa 2020, in fact, refer to the bike. Which, if I may add here, is a slightly humorous way to end this write-up about the Wahila, and definitely reflects how it's important to do thorough research on things like cryptids, and not just accept small summaries from websites or the search engine's AI system. Because I will also tell you, those systems are not worth a damn. Anyways, that's the Wahila, an interesting cryptid of Native American lore that would be terrifying to encounter in the middle of the woods. I have always been a big runner, since I was in track in high school. It's always been my favorite thing to do when I want to work out, relieve stress, or even just clear my head. So even now, at 32, I still run almost daily. Some days I just don't have time. But back in 2021, after not doing much outside for a full year, I was getting back into it quite frequently. Running on a treadmill is nice and all, but it's just not the same as an outdoor run. I usually stick to the same routes in my neighborhood, but one day, I was feeling really good and had extra time to spare. So I decided to try the hiking trail at a nature reserve. I had heard a lot of good things about the park and had been wanting to check it out. I take the bare minimum when I'm running. Usually just my phone, earbuds, a water bottle, and my ID. If I have to drive wherever I go, I have my keys, but I keep them light, so that I only have a tag and my car key on me. It was early April, around 5 p.m., so I knew I had a few hours before dark. One thing I don't do is walk or run at night. The area that I live in isn't a bad area per se, but I still don't like being alone at night. The parking lot was half full when I arrived, not crowded, but not deserted either. Perfect for what I look for. I got my music going and headed for the main trail. There were 2 loops. A shorter 2-mile path that was well-traveled, definitely more common, and a longer 5-mile loop that ventured into a more remote area of the park. I was in a good mood, but I wasn't familiar with the area, so I opted for the shorter one. The first mile was exactly what I had hoped for. The trail was well maintained with clear markers. The trail was smooth with minimal damage to it. I passed a few people, two older women walking together, a man with his dog, and then another older man taking photos of the trees. Normal park stuff. But it was nice seeing everyone being very respectful of each other's space. Around the halfway point, the trail forked. To the right was the path back to the entrance, completing the 2-mile loop. To the left was the continuation of the 5-mile loop with a warning sign that it was more challenging with less maintenance. It had a clear path, but it wasn't cement. It was more so just dirt and gravel, to be more of a nature trail. However, I was feeling pretty good. I got through that trail fast, and with plenty of daylight left, I decided to challenge myself and take the longer of the two paths. I knew I probably wouldn't get through the whole thing, but even an extra mile would be good before I had to turn back. About 10 minutes down that trail, I noticed how quickly the atmosphere changed. The trees grew denser, which blocked out a lot of the sunlight. The trail certainly narrowed and became less of a trail and more so just well-walked and worn-in path. And, on top of it all, I hadn't seen any people on this trail since the beginning. There were a few people taking pictures near the entrance, but none since. I was about to turn back because I didn't want to be walking around in the dark, but then I spotted something a little further ahead off the trail. From a distance, it looked like a makeshift tent. At first glance, I assumed maybe someone was staying in it, but as I looked at it more and walked closer, I realized it wasn't tall or wide enough for someone to actually be under it. It looked like it was just for covering something up. To be honest, I was curious. This was a nature reserve. It was a place where people walked around. There was a small building towards the entrance that had a few animals in it, information about the location, and little activities for children. This place didn't have a camping grounds. It didn't have overnight camping, per the signs posted in the front, and it didn't even look like there were any large resting spots on this trail, like a gazebo or shelter. So, why was this out here? So then, I did something that I probably shouldn't have. Something that I regretted. I approached the tarp and called out asking if anyone was there, injured, or in need of help. When I didn't get a response, I approached it further. Standing next to it, I realized that it came up a little past my hips, so maybe about 3 feet. I ran my hand across the top and realized it was flat and sturdy. After looking around for anyone in the area, I finally lifted the tarp to reveal what was underneath. There were 2 plastic tubs, both dark blue so you couldn't see into them. There was nothing on the outside. No scratches, damages, leaks, or scents. So I was still curious about the tubs, but not really scared. I had no reason to be. So I kept going. I opened the tub, and inside was a small cardboard box. The flaps were only folded over to keep it closed. It wasn't taped closed. So I opened that too. I was confused by what I saw. Tons and tons of cards, IDs, credit cards, papers, like statements, pictures of women. I picked up a handful of the cards and IDs and realized they were all female names. What the hell was I looking at? It was like someone was collecting all those because they were all different, and not even from the same state. They were from several bordering states. Were these being taken? Stolen? And what of the women that they belonged to? Were they even aware that they were missing? Hell, were they all okay? Whatever the reason for those being there, I knew that it wasn't good. Something malicious was going on there, and I stupidly stumbled upon it. And now, it had my fingerprints all over it. I stepped back and pulled out my phone, wanting to take a picture of what I found so I could report it. But as I pulled out my phone, I heard something behind me. Something from the trail that I had just come down. I looked up, and I could definitely make out a person standing near a tree. There was still sunlight, so I'm not sure what their intentions were, but as soon as I made out a person, I took off down the rest of the path. I wasn't thinking straight, and I knew that I would still have a ways to go that way, but I was not comfortable running past the person in the trees. But let me tell you, I don't think I have ever run so fast in my life, and I kind of wonder how fast I actually went. I made it out of the path and once more back in a more populated part of said path, and then I slowed down. I think I startled some people with how fast I approached, but I stopped to try and calm myself down, not breathing as I should have been, and it all caught up with me when I slowed down. I guess this couple could tell something was wrong with me, and they asked me if I was okay. Once I caught my breath, I explained to them what I had just witnessed. Everything from the tubs to the person in the trees. The man wanted to go look, but his girlfriend and myself both stopped him. I didn't know if the person in the trees was the person that brought the tubs there or just a witness. They could have thought that I brought them there too. The couple let me walk with them back to the front as they tried to small talk with me to calm me down. But to be honest, I was too worried that the person in the trees may have caught up with us or may be watching us from somewhere. If they were, would they try to attack us? Once back at the front, we went into the building and I relayed once again what I experienced. The lady gave me a curious look and confirmed that there definitely shouldn't be anything like that in the park, and that it definitely seemed suspicious and dangerous. They took down my information and said that they would look into it, but then otherwise said that I could leave. The lady definitely did look concerned, like she wanted to take care of it, but I didn't know what this little lady could do. But with nothing left to do, I left and waited to get a phone call or something. However, I never did. I don't know what ever happened to that tub of identifications. I don't know if they found it, if the person in those trees were caught, or if they managed to carry those tubs off. I regret not being able to get a picture of it, or even remembering some of the names to look the people up. I'm still left with questions years later. I hope that they did find the tubs and that they were able to give those women their stuff back. Even though, by that amount, I'm sure they probably already reported and had replaced everything. But all I can think is that they were stolen, and hope that it was just that. But then, why would you store something like that out in the open? Like I said, I have a lot of unanswered questions, but I do double-check my wallet when I'm out in public now, and I have not returned to that park either. Case 2. The story of Matthew Hulse. Matthew Hulse was a 44-year-old in 2014 and was dealing with alcoholism and found himself homeless for a time. To sustain himself, Matthew worked odd jobs, fixed up things that he found in the trash, and just about anything he could do in order to make a few dollars here and there. Eventually, he found two men who took him in as a roommate, though we only know their first names, Pete and Jason, and not much else. It seems the person who has been trying the hardest to find some clues as to what happened to Matt is his longtime friend Eric, who met Matt in 2004 in Columbia, Missouri, while Eric was traveling with two other friends. The pair hit it off immediately as they shared a kind of street smarts the others didn't possess. At the Rainbow Gathering in California, the pair actually ended up splitting off from Eric's original group and carried on traveling together, becoming best friends quite quickly. Eventually, Matt and Eric returned to Eric's hometown of Madison, Wisconsin, where Matt lived sporadically for the next 10 years. But Matt also drifted around a lot, spending time away from Madison, then coming back for a while before leaving again, living a transient life. Matt was from Columbia, Missouri, and often returned to that general area to find work in the form of mostly odd jobs. Eric says that Matt's issues with alcohol affected his ability to hold down a steady job. Matt's struggles often put strain on his relationships, driving wedges between him and his family, and sometimes even alienating him from his best friend, Eric. Several times, Matt was able to sober up for a while, but he always fell back into his alcoholism. There were times where he ended up living with his elder sister at her home in Kansas, until he was finally asked to leave by her after he fell off the wagon. This was followed by a brief period where his sister had no idea where he was, and even once he made contact again, she says they were never as close as they had been previously. At the time, the fall of 2014, he had been living with his eldest sister in Columbia, Missouri, when he was asked by her boyfriend to leave. Allegedly, he and Matt never got along as the boyfriend didn't think highly of Matt's sister taking in a homeless alcoholic. For a while afterward, it is believed that he couch surfed while he was waiting on a chance to get back to Madison to give it another try there for at least a little while. It's during this time frame he came to be staying with Pete and Jason. Eric says that over the years he had heard Matt talk about these two. He'd heard stories about them. He claimed he never heard any stories that made them sound violent or crazy, just the normal stories a friend would tell about other friends. Matt's sister at some point had also become worried about him and allegedly sent for a wellness check at Pete and Jason's home. Eric says there's a discrepancy in the actual date of Matthew going missing. He says the date found online says September 16th, 2014, but he claims the actual date that he filed it was December 18th, 2014. Matt's sister Sue said when she first heard her brother was missing that maybe he had self-deleted, feeling that, given his lifestyle, it was certainly a possibility. At one point, the detective in charge of the case contacted her and said that he wanted to take a cadaver dog to Jason and Pete's residence, just to see if there was something there. But the detective never got back with her on any further news on this. After he filed the missing person report, Eric said that he tried to get in touch with the Columbia Police Department, but never had any real help from them. To the police, he was just another homeless addict, so to them, he was a very low priority case. Sadly, this is not an uncommon theme in so many missing person cases, and especially so if they are someone with an addiction or history of being homeless. That's not to say to a degree that the authorities have a point. Due to his transient lifestyle and knack for dropping out of contact for sometimes weeks, Matt's father at one point has told of a time when Matt dropped out of contact for 3 months. So it's really hard to know a lot of what may have been truly going on with Matt at the time he disappeared, or what factors in his life might have even led to him vanishing without a trace so completely that even going on 11 years after he was last seen, no trace of Matthew Hulse has ever been found. It is truly a case where there is frustrating little that we can say for certain as to just what might have been going on with Matt, or what could have possibly led to his sudden disappearance. Even Matt's parents did not seem overly concerned. They weren't even the people to file the missing persons report. Eric was. Perhaps one of the more suspicious, if not outright disturbing things to occur in the wake of Matt's disappearance was the discovery of several of his possessions at the home he shared with Jason and Pete. Allegedly, Matt's sister found many of Matt's belongings on the front porch of the home, including his bicycle. This struck Eric as an odd thing for Matt to have left behind, because it was his primary form of transportation. Other things found were his backpack, ID and cell phone, and food stamp card. All things Matt would have taken with him had he left voluntarily. All these things Matt would need were left behind, yet he was nowhere to be found. The best answer Jason or Pete would provide was that they had no idea where Matt had gone, or why he would have left such important things behind. Eric says that he knows Matt can become combative when he's drunk, citing that there were times when even he and Matt had some physical confrontations. His theory is that maybe such a confrontation took place between the roommates, and perhaps Matt was hurt, and the pair panicked. However, no one has seen Jason or Pete either. Not long after Matt's disappearance, they suddenly moved out of that house. There's really not much more that is known about the pair of men that Matt had been living with, nor do we have any real solid leads or theories on why Matt might have vanished. And maybe that's unsatisfying, but the important thing to remember about Matt and about untold numbers of people like him is that, despite their flaws, their problems, their addictions, they are still people, and their stories should be heard. Their stories should be and deserve to be told. Matt Hulse's sister has said that anytime she sees a homeless person sleeping on a bench, that she has to stop her car and approach them, get a good look at their face, just on the off chance that it's her little brother. Even people with problems have family and loved ones, people who deserve answers. So, if you have any information about Matthew Hulse, please contact the Columbia Police Department. Hi, Raven. Back when I was a teenager, my family took a summer trip to visit my grandmother. My grandfather had passed away in 1984, so we wanted to visit the cemetery and take some flowers. My grandmother had recently been and didn't want to go with us this time. We cleaned up my grandfather's plot and added the new flowers. My mother was the only one who wore a watch that day, so she was going to keep an eye on the time because we wanted to leave around 4:30 to pick up some groceries and some supper to take back to my grandmother. The cemetery was in a bit of disarray, with flowers and all sorts of little things scattered around. Maybe a recent storm had done it. Anyway, we cleaned and neatened the surrounding graves as much as we could. We checked with my mother about the time, and she answered that it was not yet 4 o'clock. So we kept walking and talking and clearing and cleaning. We really got things looking better. We checked with my mother again, but it was not yet 4 o'clock. So we tended my grandfather's spot some more and just took our time. Eventually, we noticed the sun was setting. We asked my mother about the time. And again, it was not yet 4 o'clock. That's when she realized her watch had stopped. What time was it? We had no idea. We judged that we had only been sitting at the cemetery for an hour or so, so how was the sun setting? We hurriedly ran to our car and jumped in. My grandmother must have been very upset when we didn't come home back on time. My mother was very disappointed with her watch. It was a wind-up and very reliable. She took it off, shook it, listened to it, but it just wouldn't work. She threw it in frustration, and it bounced off the windshield, landing on the dash. My dad drove us out of the cemetery, and we were all silent. Just as we crossed the gate, we heard tick, tick, tick. My mother's watch had started working again. We hurried to my grandmother, and she was worried. She had already called the highway patrol to report us missing. My dad ran to the store to get the food. We told my grandmother what had happened, and she said, "Oh, that was your grandfather. He had always said the young folks were in such a hurry, never taking the time to truly slow down and enjoy a good visit. He promised one day that he would stop our watches so we wouldn't know when it was time to leave." Case 3, the story of Jonathan Estes. A 35-year-old Jonathan Estes and his estranged wife, Cindy, had a heated altercation on May 31st, 2018. The pair had been separated, and after the fight, Jonathan had returned to the house he had been staying at during this period. In the wake of this, Cindy called the police and reported that Jonathan had assaulted and SA'd her. She also reported that she had struck him with her vehicle. Just days later, on June 2nd, 2018, police went searching for Jonathan to question him about the allegations. He reportedly told two people that he was going down to the sheriff's office to settle the allegations, but Jonathan Estes never made it to his destination, and no one has seen or heard from him since. Jonathan Estes was a hard-working guy from Bogachito in Lincoln County, Mississippi. Oftentimes, he found himself traveling out of state for work, so his life was pretty active. He was struggling to get back on his feet after his wife Cindy had told him she wanted a divorce. This probably would have been very devastating for Jonathan, as once he became a father, his older sister said his entire life revolved around his kids, and making sure they got to do the things they wanted, including lots of travel and adventure seeking. Jonathan met Cindy through a friend at church. Not long after the pair were married, their daughter, Amy, was born, followed a couple of years later by their son Bryce. The children were his entire world, according to Jonathan's sister. Though there were certainly challenges and strains at home due to having two young children and a career that often had him traveling. Jonathan was particularly close to his son Bryce, who has often been called his sidekick. If Jonathan was home, then Bryce was with him. The pair hunted and fished together. They did archery as well as riding ATVs. Any activity the duo could share, they seemed to do. But John didn't leave Amy out by any means. Amy also often accompanied John on hunting trips. She was involved in archery, and John even coached her soccer team for a time. The source of friction between John and Cindy really seemed to come down to the fact that John worked in construction and was often out of state working on different projects. Several times they had separated and reconciled over the strain his being away often caused on the marriage. According to what John told some of his friends, he was completely blindsided in April of 2018 when on a morning he was supposed to be leaving for a job, Cindy woke him up to tell him that she wanted a divorce. The night before, everything had been fine, so John really never saw this coming at all. Despite any lingering hard feelings over the divorce, John moved forward in his life, renting his own house and focusing on what had always mattered the most, providing for his kids. During this time, John was also working on a government project in Texas, so he was making some good money through this emotionally rocky period. Jonathan was also making plans for the future. A future that involved him not being gone on the road so much, and having a more local job. He was even talking about Bryce coming to live with him. It seemed that, despite the dissolution of his marriage to Cindy, John was excited to be starting a new chapter in his life, free of what had turned into a toxic relationship. It was pretty clear to others that John was excited to be starting over as a single dad, and that he was making solid plans that involved him being around more often and not out on the road all the time for work. According to his sister, John certainly wasn't depressed or shutting down over the separation and divorce. Talking to any of the people closest to Jonathan, a pretty clear picture of him emerges very quickly. Even his boss had a very high opinion of John due to his unwavering work ethic. Jonathan had worked for him for nearly 15 years, and had worked with him at other places prior to that. When asked about the kind of person that Jonathan was, his best friend, Kevin, immediately replied with, he was a very hard worker. That seems to be one of the most common things associated with John, his work ethic. The other one is that John was a very compassionate person that would help anyone out without the slightest expectation of anything in return. And the consensus is that no one really had anything bad to say about him, and had never heard anyone else say anything bad either. He was a very loving and lovable guy. Cindy, on the other hand, is said to have always seemed like she had some kind of chip on her shoulder. Kevin has said that she always seemed like she might have been ill, or otherwise seemed like she was in some kind of hurry to leave. It seemed like if she wasn't in control, that she would try to either start a fight or otherwise orchestrate it so that she could leave. On May the 10th, John and Cindy had an altercation that started as an argument over who was going to get certain objects around the house. A video exists of part of this argument, which John began to record after the police had already been called. I've heard part of the audio, and Jonathan is completely calm from what I have heard. It's unclear exactly why he started recording, if he was just trying to perhaps document her behavior because she had tried to make false accusations in the past, or if maybe he was in fear and using the recording to protect himself if she tried to become violent. In the recording, Cindy can be heard in the background in the kitchen. Jonathan states that he is waiting for the police to arrive, and Cindy can be heard telling him to stay standing right in the door where he is until they do. As the recording continues, John reiterates for the recording what their entire argument was about, and Cindy can be heard banging around the kitchen as she clearly becomes more angry. At some point, the children come in and John has an emotional interaction with them. After the children leave, Cindy brings the conversation straight back to the original argument. While Jonathan remains completely calm, Cindy's tone becomes vindictive, almost sinister as she declares, "It's on now. I'll use everything I have to make sure you never see those kids again." Just as a side note here, I have to say that it was one of those tones that kind of made my blood run cold to hear. Whether what she was saying was a physical threat or a metaphorical one from the divorce standpoint, the tone itself is very much a threat, and that's where I'll leave that. It's pretty clear that the pair had quite a tumultuous relationship. It's also apparently known that neither of them had been completely faithful during the marriage, and John confronts Cindy saying that he knows what she's been getting up to. He confronts her with some pretty scandalous allegations of his own. Cindy denies these, of course, while John tells her he has proof on his phone. There is some back and forth between the pair about the proof, and Cindy questioning the authenticity, claiming that John could have manufactured it. Now, I'm unsure of what allegations Cindy might have made when she called the police this particular time, but this was 3 weeks before their final known altercation on May 31st. I will also say that it's a fairly safe bet that the accusations she made on the 31st were probably exaggerated, if not outright fictitious. Cindy definitely had a vindictive streak to her, and she seemed to know that the best way she could hurt him would be to do something that meant he would be unable to see his children. Something that she certainly made her intent to do very clear. So, it's not a stretch to see her using the law to try and justify not letting him have time with his kids. It has been 7 years now since anyone has seen or heard from Jonathan Estes, and it really feels like we are no closer to having satisfactory answers than we were on that day in 2018 when John left to go to the sheriff's department and never arrived. And, of course, if you have any information about Jonathan Estes, please contact the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department in Brookhaven, Mississippi. Back in 2019, my house was getting renovated due to a slab leak that had gotten worse over the 20 years we owned the house. We needed to leave, so we went to our cabin up deep in the woods. Let's just make it clear that this was my great-great-grandma's house in the early 60s, so it was really old. As soon as we got up there, some odd occurrences started, like lights flickering on and off, and pictures falling off the walls. But we just ignored it. One night, it went too far. It happened on the 4th day we were there. We were all asleep when all of a sudden we heard stomping coming from the hall, and this was a loud stomping back and forth, until it just stopped. Then, early the next morning, I woke up to a figure standing in my doorway. It was humming a soft tune. It was like a nursery rhyme, but off. The second I heard the humming, I felt scared, and all of a sudden I blacked out and then woke up on the floor. I told my mom about it the next morning, and she told me that she heard a loud bang from my room and came in running. She saw me on the floor and looked around, only to see my great-great-grandma. But she was smiling and humming the same tune that I heard, and she blacked out too. We left that cabin in a matter of hours, and I hope to never experience that again. Hi, Raven. A friend introduced me to your channel last year. I listen both at work and as I fall asleep, so thank you. Thank you for listening. I guess just for a little context, I'm Indigenous on the West Coast, British Columbia. My parents both grew believing in the spirits and afterlife. I have a few stories of experiences that we've had, and I would have only been about 6 when my mom's younger brother passed, and she was sitting up one night after we went to bed, baking for the school week, and she glanced to the doorway to our kitchen, and he was standing there leaning on the frame and said, "Smells good, sis." And then he disappeared. Fast forward to me being 18, my and my parents' bedrooms were in the basement at this time, and my dad's father passed away. Now, I never really knew the man, but I woke up one morning before work and heard work boots going up the stairs. I thought, oh good, coffee must be ready. I got up and opened my bedroom door, and my dad was still sound asleep. When I asked him after, he said that it would have been your grandpa letting you know he's here. When I was about 11, my mom's younger sister passed away, and then when I was in my 20s, my grandma, mom's mom, passed away. After both, I woke up in the middle of the night/early morning and felt someone sit at the foot of my bed and lean over me, and all I said was, "Thank you for being here for me." At one point, one of my cousins, let's call him Charles, was living with my brothers and I, and he came home from work and went to his room and laid on his bed playing games on his phone. He heard someone laughing. Thinking it was my brother, he called out and got no answers, so he got up and went to look. The house was dark and he was alone. And most recently, my boyfriend, let's call him Tyson, had a few experiences. We had been together just over a year, and one night we were laying in bed watching TV, and we both watched the doorknob to the bedroom turn. Our first thought being that it's not like my brother to not knock first. The door opened, and then stopped. I got up and said, "Thank you for letting me know you're here." Tyson's only reaction was, "WTF?" Tyson went away for work and came home after a few weeks, and we stayed up one night having drinks and watching movies, just spending as much time together as possible. Well, we fell asleep, probably only for a few hours, and he heard someone banging on the bedroom door. And this has happened to me in the past, and he jumped up half asleep, thinking he was late for work. He got dressed and popped out the door, saying, "Almost ready." Then someone was standing at the end of the hallway and held up a cup of coffee before walking down the stairs. He paused, realizing where he was, and woke me up asking when my brother, who doesn't live with us anymore, got home. I told him he wasn't. He was kind of freaked out when he told me what happened. Tyson is still away for work, and my sister recently passed away, and I can only assume that when he finally comes to see me, there will be more activity. Story 2. The Prehistoric Forest. In 1963, in the Irish Hills area of central Michigan, when tourist traffic along US 12 was at a peak, along came a little tourist trap among a sea of tourist traps, called the Prehistoric Forest. At the time, it was one of a great many such gimmicky little spots along the highway. A visit to the park, would have consisted of first a safari train ride through the forest. Along this adventure, one would have been treated to fiberglass sculptures of dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures. Very accurate ones, I'm sure. Next, along in your foray through the park, you would have walked along with a tour guide who would have taken you for a close encounter with some of the exhibits previously seen along the train ride. They would have explained the creature's habitats, and diet. Then, there was the second train ride through an area called the Land of the Leprechaun, where one could explore the myths, legends, and beliefs held by the early Irish settlers of the area. A third area was one where you could get your souvenirs, play games, and even go on your own fossil hunt in a designated digging area. Other attractions were a volcano which smoldered and spilled smoke into the sky. In the 80s, a 400-foot water slide was added as the once thriving stream of tourists began to dry up in the 80s, and the park's popularity waned. In 1981, the price of admission was only $2.75 per adult and $1.75 per child. As the 80s went by one, the various attractions closed down, and it was ultimately sold to new owners in 1997, but would barely limp along until closing for good in 2002. Without question, one of the most popular of the park's attractions were the fiberglass figurines, of which there were 15 dinosaurs, existing alongside cavemen nestled along the tropic waterfalls and the man-made volcano. Going back to the 1970s, these statues were often the target of local mischief. In 1985, 3 of the statues, including the Neanderthal man, were stolen from the park and later found in front of Saline High School. After the park was closed, a similar prank was pulled off in 2010, when some of these same statues appeared on the roof of a school in nearby Onsted. Heavy equipment was required for their removal and return to the defunct park once more. Some of the more recent acts of vandalism have not been quite so harmless or in good fun. In 2010, 2011, and 2012, during the same weekend in November, acts of property damage had been carried out when several statues had their heads or limbs smashed or busted off. After noticing the pattern in the vandalism, the owner of the abandoned park placed numerous motion-activated cameras around the park, and this was how they managed to capture their repeat offenders. It was a group of 13 teenage boys and 2 of their fathers. They were in the area for a yearly track meet and had made it kind of a tradition to deface and damage the fiberglass statues in the fading prehistoric forest, which lays a 5-hour drive from the still open and operating dinosaur gardens. I do have to say that, given the park has an entire section called the Land of the Leprechaun, I was hoping to find more crazy stories about people going out and exploring this abandoned park, just for a laugh. But remarkably little is written anywhere about the Irish myth-themed area of the park. One thing is for certain. This park is remembered more for the dinosaurs and prehistoric theme than its leprechaun theme. In 2018, it was noted that the waterfall and cavern are experiencing structural issues and have been deemed unsafe. And there have been requests for it to be demolished. In both 2019 and 2021, the current owners have stated that they want to refurbish and reopen the park, but no concrete dates have been announced for when such a reopening may happen, or when the refurbishing might begin. At multiple times, it has been listed as for sale, most recently at a price tag of $269,000, which, if I may add here, is the price of a small house. So, if you have $250,000 lying around and ever dreamed of owning a dinosaur-themed park, it might just be your lucky day. Until then, this once great American tourist trap and its fiberglass statues will continue to sit alone in the Irish hills, albeit under the watchful eyes of security cameras, while the forests and elements slowly reclaim the prehistoric forest. This was something that happened to my daughter and I back when she was 7 years old. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I do have a small business that I started myself that I handle from home, but my wife works in office. Since I'm home, I take care of a lot of stuff for my daughter, including taking her to and from school, and sometimes participating in the day trips her class holds. Some people might think that our family situation is a bit odd, but my wife and I both enjoy it. She loves her job, and I love being able to be there for my little girl whenever she needs us. With me being home, I'm able to get her any time something happens. If she's feeling sick or if she forgets something at home. I've even had to bring her some clothes to change into after an accident at recess. It really works out the best for us. Sometimes when she's out of school for a holiday and conferences, I'll take her to the park so she can play with other kids, since she's an only child and, to be honest, to get some of that extra energy out of her system. That's what led us to this situation. My daughter, I'll call her Abby, seemed a little more stressed than normal because her best friend was moving and she would be going to a different school. She was young and didn't understand the whole concept, so she was thinking that she would never see her again. In reality, her family was just moving to a nearby city, and she would just be in a different school district. But to Abby, it was the end of the world. The stresses of a 7-year-old child, huh? So I decided to take her to the park after school, in hopes of making her feel better and getting her mind off of her friend moving. We went to her favorite park that was about 15 minutes from our place. It was Abby's favorite because the main playground was castle-themed, and she loved to play king and queen. The park wasn't too busy either. There were 2 women sitting on a nearby bench talking and watching 3 other kids playing near the swings. Abby immediately ran to the tower that has a slide that circles around said tower. She got to the top, and we started playing together for a little while, until I told her that I was going to go sit on another nearby bench. I watched her from the bench as she played and shouted things out to herself, and then, as expected, she ran over to the other younger kids and started chatting with them. She's always been very outgoing. About 20 minutes after we arrived, I noticed a man enter the park. He was probably in his mid-40s, wearing jeans and a dark blue windbreaker despite the warmer weather. He walked over, looked around, and then, of all places, sat next to me. There were several benches lining the park, so to sit next to me did kind of annoy me, as I knew it meant conversation was inevitable. I didn't mind talking to people, but there were certain times, like now, watching my daughter, that I wasn't interested in conversation. He chuckled and said, cute kid you got there," as he nodded towards Abby. I smiled and said thanks, as this was a conversation I was used to hearing at playgrounds. He then mentioned how she looked just like his own daughter, and mentioned her unruly curls that you couldn't do anything with. That got a chuckle out of me because her hair is incredibly curly, and we have no idea where she got it from. Both of our families have thin and straight hair. It made me ease up at first, but then I recalled that he came to the park alone. So I asked where his daughter was, playing it off like I was wanting to see the comparison. He looked around the park and told me that she wasn't there yet. I didn't want to pry. It kind of sounded to me like an arranged visit, so shared custody or whatnot. I was all too familiar with that as a kid myself. Our conversation kind of ended there, and I went back to watching Abby. Then the guy moved closer, leaned toward me, and asked me one of the most alarming things a parent could ever hear. "Hey, do you think I could borrow her for a few hours?" I remember looking over at him, and I had to have the most horrified and angry face I could muster. And I said, "Excuse me?" This dude thought that I needed clarification to his question, and he was trying to explain how he just wanted to borrow her for a few hours for father-daughter time. Like I said, I was horrified by his comment, and immediately became defensive of not only my own daughter, but the other kids in that park. I wasn't the type to back down to stuff like that, especially if it involved my family. So, I told him straight, that's not a normal thing to ask someone, man. And frankly, it's incredibly inappropriate and creepy. The man just threw his head back and laughed, slapping his knee and everything like I had just told him the funniest joke. He claimed he was just messing around and that the state was actually bringing his daughter there too so he could spend time with her. I didn't believe him for a second, but I tried to keep my face neutral. If that was his only way of seeing his daughter, that sucked, but there must have been a reason. And if what he asked me was his version of funny, well, then maybe there was more to him. I reached down to grab the bag that I take with me. It has snacks, water, and other things we might need while we're out. And as I did, the man said that we should set up a playdate for our girls. I didn't even respond to him. I just waved him off and walked up to Abby. I asked her if she wanted to go sit at the gazebo and have a snack, hoping to get away from this guy, and she agreed. She grabbed my hand and we walked together to the gazebo to have our snack. As we ate, and Abby told me about her day at school, I was taking in the view when I saw that same guy. I noticed he was walking in a wide arc around the playground and I could see the two other women wrangling up their kids. I'm sure he was making them nervous too. But, as he left the playground, I could tell that he was making his way closer to us. And, to be honest, I didn't want to deal with him. I was afraid that I might say something worse to him, especially if he tried to say or do anything to my daughter. So, I started wrapping up our snack, to which Abby started pouting a bit, but I convinced her that we needed to get home and she could finish her snack in the car. I felt bad because we didn't stay long, but I was not feeling comfortable with him around, especially since he still did not have a kid with him. But, to make things worse, as we walked towards the parking lot, I saw him change directions, and he was now heading straight towards us. Tell me he wasn't following us at this point. I picked up my daughter, knowing that I would be able to get more distance between us that way, and she didn't mind. However, it was the yelling that started behind me that caused me to stop in my tracks. The guy started shouting, "That man, he's taking my daughter!" My stomach dropped. Was he really accusing me of taking her? I was carrying a little girl and quite clearly in a rush to get out of the parking lot. I'm sure it didn't look good, even if it was a lie. But I didn't stop moving. I got to my car and started unlocking the door, hoping to get Abby in at least while I took care of this nonsense. As I started unlocking it, the guy had clearly caught up and was still hollering about how I took his daughter. I looked around, and to my horror, there was a couple entering the park with their own little girl. They were looking right at us. I saw the dad approaching us too, and I was not looking forward to this confrontation. I was conflicted. Do I just leave and risk them calling the cops on me, possibly traumatizing my daughter with what that could entail? Do I stay and try to discuss it? Because I'm not a fighter. I watched my mom get manhandled by far too many boyfriends to know that violence was not going to solve anything, and once again, I didn't want my daughter to be afraid of me. But when the other dad approached, I could tell he was also the Papa Bear type and was not going to just let me leave with her, so I explained it all. I explained how Abby was clearly my daughter, still holding her as she hugged my neck, and that this guy was not only following us, but actually asked to borrow her. The guy continued to argue that I was lying and had taken his daughter. The other dad suggested that neither of us move and said he was calling the cops. I felt bad for Abby, but it was for the best. If anything, I could prove she was my daughter. I didn't have her birth certificate on me or anything, but I had tons of photos on my phone, and I could show proof if needed. What the hell would that guy have? As the dad was on the phone, the other guy seemed to get more and more angry and antsy. He kept saying how this was all just a waste of time and how he should just knock me out and leave. The dad tried to keep the peace between us both, but Based on how he was acting towards me and some of his gestures, I knew that he was believing me. He was trying to keep the other guy back from us. He would nod towards me and even try to talk to Abby to keep her calm by talking about his own little girl. Thankfully, that seemed to do the trick for her. She loved meeting new friends. It felt like forever, but the police finally arrived, and we all had to give our version of events to 2 different cops. I noticed the other dad that was there seemed to be pretty close to the cops as they talked and smiled. My immediate thought was that they must have known each other. After some time, they told me that I was good to leave with my daughter, and the other cops started restraining the guy in handcuffs. He started shouting things from kidnapping to other ramblings that made no sense. I got Abby in her seats and buckled in, and I went to thank the other dad that stopped it. Apparently that guy's dad was a cop, so he was familiar with a lot of the other officers. He said that he also knew from the start that she belonged to me with how she was holding on to me, versus trying to reach out to the other guy. I didn't even really think about it at the time, but none of them even tried to take her away from me. You would think if that was a concern that they would have at least taken her until it was sorted out. Either way, I thanked the man for his help because, at that moment, it was hard to think straight. I know the guy didn't actually try anything with us other than the accusations and then asking to borrow my daughter, so he probably didn't get arrested for that. But they obviously had something on him. I didn't ask, nor was it really any of my business. Thankfully, the whole thing must not have bothered Abby too much, because she fell asleep on the ride home. When my wife got home, I had one hell of a story for her. Now it's an ongoing joke between us that someone would accuse me of kidnapping her because of how little we look alike. And she looked more like my wife, minus the curly hair I mentioned, but she is definitely, as some would call it, a daddy's girl. She did everything with me and had a lot of my mannerisms and personality. I guess I can hold on to that at least. Bottom line, when it comes to your kids, there is no such thing as overreacting. Don't worry about being polite to creeps. Your child's safety always comes first. Story 3. The Fairy Doors of Ann Arbor. I do hope that Scary Fairy Godmother will forgive me for writing this one, but it's just too darn interesting. Whimsical, even. Who would have thought it, but Ann Arbor is home to an entire world of urban fairies. Yes, fairies. Scattered throughout Ann Arbor are tiny little doors about 6 inches high that open to a miniature world within. Beyond these doors are other tiny doors and even tiny windows that will magically light up sporadically as tiny denizens carry out their daily lives. This would certainly be odd to discover, maybe a bit unsettling, but I feel it's much less scary than, say, a murderous bear dog prowling around. It all started back in the olden days of 1993, when Jonathan B. Wright began renovations on his home. During the remodel, his young daughters began discovering these little 6-inch doors in various places around the house. The first one was found in a remodeled closet. Upon opening the door, they found a staircase with railing that led up to another tiny door. Once the family's fireplace had been built, the girls found another door that opened into a tiny room with a tiny fireplace of its own. There was also another tiny door that opened, revealing a landing with a checkered black and white floor. Their placement is as whimsical as the very things that dwelled on the other side of these miniature doors, and the urban fairies that dwell within. Upon completing the remodel of his kitchen, a tiny door was found with a tiny set of windows that looked out into the Wrights' breakfast area, leading one to wonder if maybe the Fae counterparts didn't, in their own way, enjoy a nice breakfast with the Wrights as part of their own little daily routine. By 2005, Wright, now a full-blown fairyologist, was documenting 24 of these 6-inch doors that were popping up all over the city. In the Ann Arbor Public Library, for instance, The little folk have made a home out of a bookcase and volumes of fairy tales. Then there's the gift shop known as the Peaceable Kingdom, in which the fairies have set up their own elaborate little store full of all the things that a thriving fairy community may need, nay, demands. Pennies, acorns, sweets, and all manner of shiny loot. Michigan Theater houses another tiny gem, a private fairy theater complete with a working screen. If fairies or fairy lore is your thing, then I would strongly advise you check out Wright's website, urban-fairies.com. It has some pretty cool pictures curated throughout the site, as well as some encounters, history, and lore. I don't think it's been significantly updated in quite some time, but if nothing else, it's a very intriguing little time capsule to explore. I think as far as strange things to have in your city, this would be one of the more desirable things to stumble across. Not that Fae can't be mischievous or bothersome, but it would for the most part seem that the fairies of Ann Arbor are mostly content to just live and let live, with some of them even modeling their miniature world to resemble or even reflect the larger human world around their own. I personally think that maybe these tiny rooms, tiny theaters, and shops could be the boundary, and beyond the oft-locked doors on the other side of these tiny rooms could be the fairy realm. But until someone shrinks themselves down or receives some kind of formal invitation, we will probably never fully understand the true culture of the urban fairy, or why they have chosen Ann Arbor as a kind of Tir na Nog. I really don't know what I did to provoke this, if I did anything. When I was a kid and teen, I didn't have a lot of supervision, and the adults who were in my life were not good people. I have many stories about creepy people in my life, and I have two short examples. I chose these two because they weren't too graphic for the internet rules. First, when I was 13, my friends used to hang out at the $1 movies, which was located in downtown Calgary, where I was raised. And this was 1993, so no cell phone. The movie ended around midnight, and I walked to the train with my friends. They got on their train, and I was left alone to wait for mine. I noticed a man at the train station that was at the theater as well, and I didn't see anyone else. The station speaker announced that there were no more trains due to an emergency. The bus had already ended, and I was 13 with the bus pass and nothing else. I saw that man getting angry and swearing. I didn't know what to do, and he was the only one that I could see, so I decided to ask him for a quarter for the payphone so I could call home for a ride. I didn't know the collect call trick yet. The man yelled at me in a super scary rage, like saying that I should go ask my pimp. I let him know that I didn't have a pimp, and he grabbed me by my hair and slammed my head into the wall. All I could do was scream at the top of my lungs, as I was only 110 pounds and 13. I didn't know how or where this other man came from, but he appeared and started beating the man who had grabbed me. I'm not sure what I would have done if that other man had not been there for me, and he also taught me the collect call trick. Second, when I was 18, I was walking to the train station after work in Calgary, near McLeod Trail. If you know, it's a very busy 4-lane in each direction. Very noisy and very busy intersection. I crossed the first north-south and was waiting for the east-west crossing, and I saw a man waiting to cross the north-south side staring at me. I made eye contact and he started screaming at me from his side. I have no idea what he was saying, and I debated waiting for the next light, but I got a really bad feeling. And my side changed to walk, so I just went and he crossed on his side. But we were still separated by the north-south crossing. I was so scared as he started yelling even louder and punching his chest. I made it across, and his light was about to change, and all I could think to do is run. As soon as my foot reaches the curb, I did a full-on sprint. It was about 1 mile to the station, and I didn't look back until I got to the very long, steep stairs down to the train station. The steps were about 5 to 6 sets of 10. When I looked back at that point, I saw him full-on chasing back. I thought maybe he would have gotten the hint, but I was even more secluded where I was now, and I jumped each set of 10 steps, landing on each landing, and I finally reached the train station, and I saw a bus parked. Looking back, I see the man still running down the steps. I ran on the bus and ran straight to his seat, and I yelled that a man was chasing me and that I didn't know why. The bus driver closed the door and used the radio to call for an emergency. The man ran up to the door and was punching the door with both hands, and the bus driver told him that the police were on their way. He just ran away to the train station. Right away, the police came and ran into the train station as he got on, and he got away at that point. I stayed on the bus until the police came to me and then gave my side. They let me know that they got him at the next station, and I proceeded on the next train home. While we were passing through the next station, I saw several cops restraining the guy, and I made eye contact with the man, and he started raging again and flailing around. I was so happy when the train started moving again. I'm lucky, to be honest. Someone or something has been protecting me throughout the years, and I'm thankful for all the protection that I have received. This happened about a decade ago when I was visiting my aunt in a small town in rural Vermont. For a bit of context, I was 23 at the time of this story, and I was a lot closer to my Aunt Char than I ever was with my parents. She's my mom's sister, married young, then divorced, no kids, but she seemed to understand kids better than my parents. She was always loving and welcoming. She didn't judge me or make me feel like I wasn't good enough. Needless to say, she was my home away from home and basically a second mother to me. So when she was going to have knee surgery, I picked up some of my stuff to stay with her for a few weeks to help her recover. Aunt Char lives in a town that had maybe 1,500 people total. There was your town center, which had a handful of stores, like a single grocery store, a gas station on both ends, which I always thought was silly because they were never busy, as well as some other little shops around. And then there were just miles of winding roads, sprinkled with random farmhouses and cabin-style houses. My aunt lived on an old farmhouse, about 2 miles from the town center, so she lived in the, quote, busy part of town. So, she had a few neighbors around and even saw some people walking by to get to the gas station. I swear, I think smoking was an extracurricular activity in that place, and my aunt was one of them. So, anyway, while I was there, I would spend my morning taking care of her, making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. She did have internet, so I would spend a few hours working throughout the day, too. I would make our meals for us so she didn't have to. Sometimes I would go for a walk and just explore the area before going home again to make dinner or watch a movie with my aunt. It was a pretty simple daily schedule. And quite frankly, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my walks because even if the town was small and run down, it was also a cozy little place. Most people were friendly enough, if not a bit reserved, to outsiders like me, which was fine. About a mile from my aunt's house was this bright yellow house that stood out against the typically muted colors of the other homes. It was well maintained with a sturdy black barred fence around the property. The yard was mowed and the blooming bushes near the mailbox were even trimmed, and in order. I passed it a few times during my walks and thought nothing much of it, other than the owner really cares about their home and lawn. Occasionally, when I took my walks in the afternoon, I would stop at the bloomed bushes to watch the bees fly around, and yes, literally smell the flowers. I think they were some kind of butterfly bush, but they smelled marvelous, and I could even smell them on a good, windy day. On one of my walks, I decided to try a new route, which would have me loop behind my aunt's property and bring me back to the main road. As I rounded a bend in the road, I realized I was approaching the yellow house from the back. From that angle, I could see a detached garage and a large shed behind the main house. All of it's in that same matching yellow. But this time, I saw a man in the backyard working on something at a table. He must have sensed I was watching him because he looked up at me and waved. I smiled and waved back, and he called out, "Beautiful day for a walk." I agreed. And while I didn't plan on stopping, I did slow down some, expecting a small conversation. He seemed normal enough, probably in his 50s, average build, wearing a t-shirt and khaki shorts. He asked if I was staying with Shar, and I confirmed with a raised eyebrow, curious as to how he knew. I told him I was her niece and was staying with her for a few weeks. He then asked how she was doing after her surgery, and this seemed to ease my mind a bit. I thought, of course, Kelly, you're in a small town. Everybody probably knows everyone else, so it made sense in my mind. I explained that she was doing well and just in a bit of pain at times. He nodded along, listening to me from the other side of the decorative fence. His face then lit up, saying that he had something for my aunt that he needed to return to her anyways, and offered me a glass of lemonade, saying it was homemade. I know, normally, alarm bells should have been ringing, or at least telling me to be cautious, but the man was old enough to be my father, and he knew my aunt. Surely she would have mentioned me to him and others. So I agreed to have a glass of lemonade with him. He motioned me to his gate, and opened it to let me in, to which I walked into his yard and sat on one of the plastic lawn chairs nearby. When I approached, he had been standing over a table with a cloth. From where I was standing, it looked like he was cleaning something, but I couldn't quite tell what it was. Now, I can see that he had a large set of knives, daggers, and even a sword of some sort laid out on a towel next to some sort of cleaner. When he returned with the two glasses, he must have noticed me looking at the table and asked me if I was a collector. I told him that I didn't collect things with blades, but that I did have other collections. And that's when I took a sip of the lemonade. However, it tasted off. I couldn't quite place what it was, though. It wasn't exactly bitter, but it wasn't sweet, either. It's just that something was definitely off about it, and I didn't know what. After the collection conversation, he called out that I wasn't wearing a ring, and asked if I was married or seeing someone. At first I said no, which was the truth, but then, me always being a nervous person, I felt the need to lie. I said that I wasn't married, but I was seeing someone, and it all came out in a stuttering mess. No, well, yeah, well, not married, but yes, I am seeing somebody. He seemed to be amused by my response and chuckled. He said he wasn't married or with anyone anymore. Then, he suggested that we should go have dinner somewhere while I was in town. He said this like we were old friends, surprised to see me and wanting to catch up. I was also surprised because of our age difference. I didn't even know him, and he just assumed that his offer was completely normal. I thanked him for the offer, but then declined, saying that I was just there to help my aunt out, and then I would be leaving. I noticed he became a bit more, how to put it, aggressive, yet friendly. He sat his lemonade down, and picked up the cloth and a blade, and began wiping it down again. He said in that aggressive yet calm tone, "Well, you can take the night off. She's not going to die overnight from a knee injury." It wasn't him asking It was him telling me to. And I immediately became uncomfortable with the whole situation. As I watched him wipe the blades down, it started making me feel overwhelmed and dizzy. That I chalked it up to me just being awkward and out in the heat. Clearly, I needed more water. I sat the glass down on the same table as I tried to think of a way to leave. Then, he asked me a really specific and suspicious question. He asked me if I was feeling okay, and when I hesitated and mentioned that I was feeling a little sick, he then asked me if I was feeling tired. In fact, I was. I was fine while I was walking, and even when I got back from my walk, I might feel a little worn out, but not the way that I was feeling at that moment. I realized that what I was feeling was dizzy and, yeah, tired. But why? It just came on out of nowhere, because I felt fine when I left for my walk. And that's when he picked up my glass of lemonade and insisted that I drink the rest of it, claiming it would help. At that moment, I was getting pretty worried. I realized that I was in this man's backyard, a man whose name that I didn't even know, as we never shared names. My aunt didn't know where I was because she was under the impression that I had just gone for a walk. Part of me felt silly, but I started panicking a bit and stood up, saying that I needed to get back to my aunt. That is when he grabbed my arm and told me that I needed to stay. It was like I was frozen in place, unable to move. We all say I would never let that happen, and I'm guilty of that too, but for some reason, I was too scared to move. Too scared to really do anything. But when I didn't go back to sit in the chair either, it still seemed to make him mad. He looked angry, and he made a comment that I will never forget. He said, "This is my town. I'm part of the city council, and when I want something, I get it." Something about that comment was more sinister than the words itself. Being afraid for myself and how I was feeling, I asked him to let go of my arm. And surprisingly, he did. He stepped back and laughed, talking about how my generation was too self-centered and greedy, that we didn't care about anyone else, and that we needed to learn to respect our elders. As he said this, I stepped backwards a few times, then quickly made my way to the gate. He didn't stop me. He didn't say another word. He just went back to cleaning the knives as I opened the gate. I'm not much of a runner, but I don't think I've ever run so much as I did after that to get back to my aunt's house. When I got back and burst through the front door, I knew that my aunt could see the terror on my face, and she asked me what was wrong. I told her about the guy in the yellow house, and I watched as my aunt looked very concerned. She explained how that guy was named, well, Guy, actually, and she said that he was a real creep. She apologized for not mentioning him, but she also didn't expect him to come out of his house and harass someone on the street after being bullied basically to stay home. Curious and concerned about what I had just gotten myself involved in, I asked her to tell me more. She explained how he was with the city council at one point, but he was kicked out due to some sort of inappropriate conduct. She mentioned when she got married, he would try to hit on her all the time and try to fight her husband. He also tried to get way too handsy and aggressive with one of the waitresses at their little restaurant/bar down the way, so he was kicked out of there too. They couldn't really do much to him, legally, so a lot of people just bullied him to stay out of certain stores and just steer clear of him, which was probably why none of the other residents, including my aunt, mentioned him, thinking he would just keep to himself. But the more I thought about the interaction, the more creeped out I got. I remember that he said he had something to return to my aunt, and he never did bring it out with the lemonade. According to my aunt, he would never have anything of hers that she willingly gave him, so she felt that it was just another lie. Then I was worried about the lemonade. It had a strange taste, and I started feeling strange afterwards. I wondered if he could have done something to it. Maybe spiked it? But then what could he have possibly put in it that I would feel the effects after 2 sips? I took a normal drink the first time, which is when I noticed that it tasted funny, and then I just tried a small sip, holding it in my mouth long enough to try and identify the taste, but I couldn't. If he did drug it, it was strong, but at least it wasn't enough to knock me out, and I was able to get back with minimal issues. After that, I stayed pretty close to her home, just walking up and down the streets, if anything. I never saw him again. I was worried for my aunt at first, like what if he tried to do something to her because of me, or because she had knee troubles now, but she assured me that she would be fine, joking about her arms being able to swing her metal bats just fine. I even visited her on occasion after that, and he's come up occasionally. She said that she still had not heard anything about him, so I guess he was back to being a creepy hermit. Hopefully no one else had family visiting and got reeled in like I did from his pseudo-friendly neighbor disguise. The following is a write-up on the case of Ken McElroy, a case of vigilante justice. July 10th of 1981, a day that will live forever in the lore of Skidmore, Missouri. It was on this day that a small town stood up for itself after years of living in the terror of a man by the name of Ken McElroy. Time and time again, McElroy had been brought into court, but every time through various tactics, including witness intimidation, a favorite tactic of McElroy's, he managed to evade justice time after time. So, after he shot an elderly store owner, the town had had enough. They made their own justice when Ken McElroy was gunned down in a hail of gunfire, yet no assailants were ever convicted in the killing. To this day, no one from the town will talk about who all participated in the act of vigilantism. I'm not here to glorify this case, despite the nature of McElroy's character. I want to approach this as unbiased as possible, because at the end of the day, a man was killed. For better or worse, it is not my place to judge, nor try to convince you, the audience, that the cold-blooded murder of someone was, or was not, justified. Whether we think it was right or not, we do have to acknowledge that it was indeed an act of murder. In Ken's background. It was on June 1st, 1934, that Tony and Mabel McElroy had their 15th of 16 children, Ken. A poor migrant family, they were living in Overland Park, Kansas at the time of Ken's birth. As a large, poor family, life was particularly hard for Ken and his siblings, where you had to fight for everything you got, and often underhanded tactics were resorted to in order to win over the weaker siblings. Thus, Ken learned to lie, cheat, and steal to survive at a young age. Though, one of his favorite tactics was also born of this upbringing, the one he would resort to most often throughout his life: intimidation. No stranger to violence through his life, as he grew up, Ken was not afraid to get physical in order to get his way. As a teen, once he came into possession of his first car, he became very good at theft in order to keep his car mobile. If he needed gas, he would often siphon gas from the other cars in town, or parked at the rural farms in the area, or steal to earn money for gas. If his car had broken down or was in need of a new part, he would often target other people who owned the same or a similar model to his own, and steal parts right off of them in the night. He also became very persuasive with women, and began engaging in affairs with many of the married women in town, and often employed him in one of the most lucrative of ventures: livestock rustling. At night, Ken would go and steal livestock from farms around the area, and in the morning, have one of his mistresses go to the local livestock yard and sell the animals for cash. One of the most tragic and dark aspects of the entire Ken McElroy iceberg is his last wife, Trina McLeod. Ken was already 35 and married to his second wife, Alice, when he met the then very age-inappropriate Trina. She wasn't even a teenager when she became a victim of Ken's predations. When she was 14, to escape the SR charges, Ken divorced Alice and got married to Trina in a very shady ceremony with no witnesses beside the bride. While her parents had initially opposed the marriage, Ken was able to intimidate them by burning down their home. Just to make matters worse, he also took the life of the family's pet. It was prior to her marriage that she had become pregnant, and 16 days after she gave birth, Trina, Alice, and the baby fled from Ken, only for him to track them down and force them to return with him. During a period where Trina's parents were away, Ken also repeated his original punishment that he had dealt out the last time they had made him angry. And based on his known temper, one can only imagine how he might have punished Trina and Alice in his fury. One of the most tragic parts of Trina's story is that eventually she became just as sadistic as her abuser. Oftentimes, her and the couple's children would use the threat of Ken's wrath to bully, intimidate, and otherwise get their way among the townspeople. They became almost as terrifying as Ken himself, because one word from them could have Ken McElroy raising all manner of hell in your place of business, if not your home. Throughout his life, Ken was brought up on charges 21 times, and every single time, he managed to walk away a free man. Well, all except the last time, that is. The times Ken managed to go free were usually due to the sudden unwillingness of a witness to testify against Ken. He often intimidated them by following them, lurking around outside their homes and just being as ominous and threatening as possible, taking people's sense of security until they feared him more than the law. For years, Ken ruled through this fear. Even when he wasn't around, they were reluctant to speak ill of him, for fear that someone might rat them out in order to possibly gain a little bit of favor with this tyrant. Then, one day, he went too far. One day, he came into town in a fit of rage and shot the elderly store owner, Ernest Bowenkamp. Ken was brought up on these charges but managed to appeal his conviction and get himself released on bond. Of course, the first thing Ken did was begin a campaign to terrorize Bowenkamp and those who were sympathetic to the elderly man's plight. On July 9th of 1981, Ken once more came into town angrily seeking out Bowenkamp. He found his target in the local tavern, and armed with his rifle, Ken proceeded to threaten the old man's life. Once Ken had left, the town was abuzz with activity. Allegedly, there was a kind of impromptu town meeting where it was decided that Ken's reign of terror had to come to an end, by any means necessary. And it was decided that if the law could not or would not help them, then they would stand up for themselves, and in a way that Ken McElroy wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. The following day, Ken and Trina came into town. Ken went into one of the shops and got himself a pack of cigarettes. Then, as the town bully got back into his truck and sat next to his wife Trina, Ken McElroy was shot dead in broad daylight. There were roughly 35 to 40 witnesses around, but no one was willing to say a word about who the shooters were. And to this day, no one ever has. It was ruled, however, that he was killed by bullets from 2 different guns. Who's to say that maybe one day a letter or journal or even deathbed confession may shed light on the 44-year-old mystery of just who killed Ken McElroy that day in 1981, while more than 30 people, including his wife Trina, watched on. And that is the tale of how one man held a small town in such fear that one day they hit a breaking point and fought back with lethal consequences. But when you kick a dog every time you walk past it, you don't make it highly likely that one day it's going to bite you. You make it inevitable. Right or wrong is not my place to decide. When a life is lost, it's not a thing to take lightly. If nothing else, we should always try to understand what led to this outcome. Could it have been avoided? Ken McElroy was beyond evil. There were so many vile things that this man did to so many people. I will not say that the small town of Skidmore, Missouri should not have stood up for itself, but I will say that we should take a hard look at what brought it to a point where they no longer had a choice but to take the law into their own hands and become vigilantes. Story 4, The Singing Sands of Bay de Gris. Originally named Bay de Gris, meaning the Bay of Sandstone, Bay de Gris, Grey Beast, is a nature preserve situated on the Keweenaw Peninsula and is truly a picturesque place. A popular tourist spot with beautiful beaches along the Great Lakes, but there are legends about these beaches, stories about these sands, and a phenomena that makes these sands sing. As with so many things, the story behind this dates back to native stories about a woman who lost her husband, or lover, to the waters of the Great Lakes. And to this day, her voice lingers in the sand as she calls for her lost love, hoping he will at long last follow her voice and return home. I'm not really sure what could cause such a phenomena as this. They say that when you press down on the sand with your palm, that the sand will sing, and that it will bark if struck. I've honestly never heard of anything like this before, and I'm certainly curious to hear these sands. However, don't think that you can collect some of the sand to take home and have it serenade you each night. They say that once the sand is removed from the beach, that it loses its singing abilities, or properties, however you want to couch it, which is kind of a bummer. I think everyone would be better for having this random dish of singing sand in their home. It's a very strange sentence that Tom wrote in this, and I kind of have to agree with him on that. A wonderfully simplistic little legend, perhaps, but when you think about the phenomena with the context of just how picturesque Bay de Gris truly is, the magic they weave together is a bit heady. Intoxicating, even. The romance and tragedy behind the separated lovers, coupled with the serene beauty of the area, and only then factor in the singing sands, it truly becomes a kind of beautiful story with a phenomena that's honestly not at all scary, but certainly piques one's curiosity. We're all thinking it, so I'll just say it. Would the singing sand totally slay at karaoke night? That was Tom's joke, not mine. I just want that on the record. I guess since it can't sing once it's removed from the beach, we'll never be able to find out. But perhaps a nice reminder that not all strange or unexplainable things are necessarily scary or malevolent. I've posted a lot of paranormal stories for your channel, and one about my sleepwalking and night walks. I realized recently that I forgot to include two of the worst night walks of my life. The first one was when I was 17. I was still living with my abusive grandmother at the time, and I occasionally would slip out at night, when things were bad, to sleep on my friend's couch until it cooled down. The district my grandma lived in is cut off from the rest of the city by a highway, on which there are only crosswalks across every few miles. So, to get to my friend's house, I had to leave my street, go down to the highway on the main road, a mile up the highway before crossing, and then over a bridge, and finally down that road about a mile. My friend's street came up on the right. All in all, About a 3-mile walk. This night, my grandmother had been following me around the house, degrading me. I locked myself in my room so I could get my homework done unimpeded, but she unlocked my door and was throwing my textbooks at me for walking away while she was talking to me. I immediately grabbed what I was working on, my emergency pay-as-you-go cell phone a friend had given me, and threw them and whatever books hit me into my bag, and then I bolted out the door. I made it to the highway in this field lined with a fence made of decorative boulders and rope, before I slowed down to send a text to my friend, letting her know that I was on my way and to have the first aid kit ready, as usual. I put the phone in my pocket, and then I jumped as I heard 3 loud bangs, and saw something hit the decorative boulder beside me. I quickly ducked behind the boulder and dialed 911. Dispatch said a cop was already there, and I looked up to see one walking my way. He had been parked on the corner of the street that I got on the highway from, and saw the entire thing. He said I was really lucky they missed as he bagged the 3 bullets, and then he gave me a ride to my friend's house. They did catch the guys who shot at me, just some high school boys on a joyride with their parents' guns. The cop had given their plate number to another officer up the highway. I was really grateful until that same cop dragged me back home for being a runaway 3 days later. The second time was a year later. I had graduated, moved in with roommates, and had met my first long-term boyfriend. Yes, I'm a gay man. My boyfriend lived basically on the south tip of the city, and I lived on the north side of the city. The walking route was about 5 miles and went through a shady section of town called Railroad Boulevard. On that street, there's houses on one side and the railroad and some small factories on the other. I would usually stay over at my boyfriend's every weekend, but he sometimes had early morning classes or family things, and I would have to leave Saturday night instead of spending the whole weekend there. And this was one of those nights. I'd made it across town and was almost through Railroad Boulevard when I saw a car slow down as it approached me. So I veered away from the street and towards the factory. I figured if they were looking for someone, they would speed back up, and if they were looking for trouble, I'd have an escape. I had a knife in my pocket and an old radio antenna. Neither would do much damage, but if someone jumped me on my walk, they would get it as bad as I did. But I could see at least 3 people in his car, and they were rolling their windows down. That's when I saw a handgun and started running. They emptied their clip at me. Thank whoever is out there that they missed, and then they sped off down one of the residential streets. Meanwhile, I jumped the fence of the factory and hid behind the dumpster on the other side. It was one of those chain-link fences with the plastic pieces in it, so you couldn't see through it. The next thing I knew, the fence was illuminated by headlights, and I heard car doors shut. I heard a guy say, "Where the hell did he go?" And another guy said, "I can't believe you freaking missed." They looked around for me for what felt like ever, but for some reason they didn't jump the fence themselves. I was literally 10 feet away from it, tucked between 2 dumpsters and a recycle bin. Eventually I heard one of them yell, "Crap, security!" And they got in the car and floored it out of the parking lot. I was shaking and my heart was pounding. I couldn't move. Eventually I heard the gate unlock and saw a flashlight. The security guard said, "You can come out now, they're gone," and he escorted me off the property. He apologized for not getting there sooner, but apparently the security office is on the south side of the factory, and the parking lot is on the north side. He had to run across the whole factory to get to me, and wasn't even sure he would make it in time. I'm just lucky that they were dumb enough not to climb the fence themselves. I did make it home that night, but I'd be lying if I said that I slept, and didn't jump at every engine sound outside my house that night. I don't often go to public parks. I'm single and don't have any kids, so really I don't have a reason to. However, I do read a lot. At home, at coffee shops, even at work or while I was in college. But one day I wanted to do something different. I decided to take my Kindle to the park and read since it was such a nice day out. It was right on the cusp of summer, so it was warmer but not unbearable yet. And I did enjoy the summer. The park wasn't crowded either, surprisingly for a Saturday afternoon. I was expecting to see a lot of kids, but it was pretty empty with maybe a handful of them playing around. I found a bench that was a little further from the park and the water fountains. This way I was less likely to be stopped and stared at by kids needing to get water. The bench was also under a tree, so I got some shade, too. I pulled out my Kindle and pretty quickly lost myself in my book. A little over an hour into my reading session, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. 3 guys had entered the park from different areas and were meandering around in a way that seemed purposeful. Like there was clearly a reason they were doing this. Yet trying not to appear so. They weren't dressed alike, all jeans and t-shirts, 2 with ball caps, and one of them also had a light jacket on, but something about them felt uniform. The way they scanned the area, their alertness, and the subtle glances they exchanged. One of the guys wearing a cap pulled it low, trying to cover his face. Another one that had a tattoo sleeve kept checking his phone and looking around. That's when we made eye contact. His gaze lingered, which made it awkward for me, so I looked away and back to my book. After a while, I started feeling like I was being watched. You know that feeling. I'm sitting at a coffee shop and you get that burning sensation in the back of your head, so you turn around and see a kid with a handful of muffin watching your computer screen intently. That kind of feeling. I would look around and I would see these 3 guys looking at me, and they would casually look away. One of them was talking on a cell phone as we made eye contact. Something was not right here. I didn't know what was about to go down. A drug deal, kidnapping and ransom, or maybe they were just looking for someone to beat up. Was I wearing something offensive? I didn't think so because I was just in jeans and a black t-shirt with a Triforce on it. Whatever it was, you could definitely feel the tension. The park was practically empty at this point. There was a younger girl on the swing on the other side of the park, but I didn't see anyone else. This was not looking good for me. Now there weren't even witnesses if something were to happen. I felt like I needed to get out of there before something did happen. I placed my bookmark, locked my Kindle, and slipped it into my back pocket. I stood up and stretched, trying to appear casual, like I wasn't freaking out internally. As I started walking toward the parking lot, I glanced back and saw the tattoo guy change directions, now walking parallel to my path. This did not help my anxiety. In fact, it made it worse. I tried to remain calm, but I don't think I was doing too well. I tried to look as if I was interested in the trees, looking up at them, but quickened my pace to nearly jogging. When I looked back, the tattoo guy had closed the distance between us significantly, and, worse yet, the other 2 men were drawing close from different positions. At this point, I couldn't risk being casual. They were clearly coming for me. I pulled out my keys and took off in a full sprint, trying to ready my car key. I heard someone shout, "He's running!" which confirmed my fears. They were definitely after me. I pushed myself to get to my car. I was so focused on my destination that I didn't notice a 4th man. A guy in a gray t-shirt who seemed to materialize from behind a tree until he was directly in my path. I tried to stop myself from running into him, but I failed. I put my hands out to stop myself, and he pushed me, knocking me on my ass. Literally. Landing on my Kindle. I tried getting up, but the new guy was pushing me back and began shouting, "Stay down! On your stomach now! Arms out, don't move!" Several voices now surrounded me, one of them forcing me to roll over as they cuffed me? I was confused, still terrified, but was I being arrested? I tried asking what was going on, but they wouldn't answer. They kept asking, "Where's the package? Where's the stuff?" I was genuinely confused. The tattoo guy was now crouching beside me, looking very intimidating, and he asked me again where it was. I told them I had no idea what they were talking about. I explained that I was there to read and that I was from the area, trying to nod towards my car. The way they talked to me, I could tell they didn't believe me, talking about how I had been sitting on the bench, watching them, and even mentioned ditching the deal because I felt the heat. I told them I ran because they were clearly following me. I was pleading with them that I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. I told them to check my back pocket for my Kindle, explaining I was just there to read. I even told them that their staring was creeping me out, so I decided to leave. There was a pause, and I felt one of them pull out my Kindle. They helped me up, so I was now sitting on the ground, and to make it worse, he was now showing me my shattered Kindle. As the tattoo guy crouched by me again, he unlocked the device and saw that I was in the middle of a book. And that's when I noticed for the first time the earpiece that he had. I think they were undercover cops. One of the other guys sighed and said some kind of code as he touched his ear. As two of them walked away to talk, the new guy walked over to me and asked me for my name and if I had ID on me. I told him my wallet was in my other pocket, and he pulled it out. I gave him the info he asked for, though. Name, age, address, even where I worked. He asked if I was there to meet anyone or if I heard anything about something going on in that park. I told him no. I was literally there to read, something I never did. After about an hour of giving my statement to 3 other people, 2 cops that weren't even there to begin with, they uncuffed me. They handed me my Kindle and wallet back and then apologized for the confusion. I was still startled from this whole situation, but also confused and, a little upset. They had broken my Kindle. One of the new guys, who I think was a supervisor, told me to go to the station, fill out a damage claim, and they would then look into it. Sure. I think the anger took over because I asked them if I was supposed to just leave like this wasn't a big deal. Like they didn't just handcuff a completely random person. Tattoo guy basically confirmed this, saying that he would appreciate it if I left then and left quickly. I may not know the exact details of that stint, but I could put some of the pieces together. I assumed they were doing some kind of bust, but they were obviously paying attention to the wrong person. I don't know if they ever caught the right person, but anyway, I walked out of there, still a bit shaky, got into my car and drove straight to the station. I told them that I needed to file a damage claim and that I also wanted to file a complaint. And thankfully, they took it more seriously than the ones in the park. And about 3 or so months later, I got a check in the mail for $100 as a solution to my broken Kindle. Well, I guess they could have done nothing. I haven't gone back to that park and certainly don't go to the park now to read at all. I have gone to other parks with my sister and her kids, but that's about it. I won't go alone. And if I see people in areas who seem to stick out, or they're too attentive, I walk the other way. I'll just stick to the areas that I know. At least this way, I know that I won't break my new Kindle, or leave with a panic attack. Every time I listen to this podcast, I think about writing in with my experience, but could never bring myself to do it until now. This happened to me back in the mid to late 80s. It's haunted me all my life and terrified me so deeply as a child that I never shared it with anyone. I grew up in a small town in the South. We were a well-established neighborhood of low to middle-class families. My sister is 4 years older than me and was in middle school when this occurred. She and my mother had purchased one of those make-your-own dollhouse kits, where you paint the house and then buy all the furniture for it. The kind that they sell at a craft store, not a toy store. I would have been around second or third grade. I was super jealous of this house. They spent so much time on it, and they kept telling me I was too young to have one. They were putting wallpaper in it, and carpets, all this cool antique-looking furniture. I was very envious. About 1 to 2 weeks after they started this dollhouse, I had gone for a walk in the neighborhood. Back in the 80s, we were pretty much free to roam around. A few houses down my street, I see a dollhouse that someone had put out by their weekly trash. I couldn't believe my luck. It was a very similar style to the one that my sister had. I looked it over and couldn't see anything wrong with it. I couldn't figure out why someone would have just put it out in the trash pile. It was especially odd given the house it was at. They were a poorer family that had 3 girls. I'd been at their house countless times, and I had never seen anything like this in their house. After looking it over, I decided it must just be my lucky day. I took the dollhouse home and put it in my playroom. My house was one of those split-level homes where you entered on one floor and all the bedrooms were upstairs, and the playroom was in the basement. My parents did not believe our bedroom should be used for hanging out in. We only used them for sleep, and all of our toys were in the basement. I spent the rest of the day in the basement playing with that new dollhouse. That night, I went to bed as normal. My sister and I shared a room, and I was having a hard time sleeping. I really wanted to keep playing with that new dollhouse. My sister was asleep, so I poked my head out into the hallway, and it appeared that my parents and brother were sleeping as well. I thought that it sounded like a good idea to sneak downstairs. I walked down that first flight of stairs, and then came to the stairs that led to the basement. The basement was pitch black, except for our light switch. We had a light switch in the basement that would glow orange when it was in the off position. That way you could see where it was on the wall. I was sitting on the top step looking into the basement feeling a little scared because it was so dark, and the orange light had an ominous glow. After sitting there for a few minutes, I started hearing a voice talking to me. It was a low voice, deep, and I couldn't quite make out what it was saying. For some reason, instead of scaring me more, I started walking into the basement to see if I could figure out where this voice was coming from and what it was saying. As I walked downstairs, I turned on the light so I could see better. I could tell the voice was coming from the dollhouse. As I got closer, I could hear that it was saying horrible things. It was talking about wanting to take my soul and sending me to hell. This is something I've pondered on more the older I've gotten. My family was not very religious, and we come from an Episcopal church background. I'm not sure why I thought of how I would have known this at a young age, but I knew this voice belonged to a demon. I just knew it. I could feel it almost like it told me. I started telling it to shut up and that I didn't believe in it, and that it should leave me alone. It had almost a cloud-like presence, and it was coming out of the dollhouse and moving toward me. It was moving in a direction that prevented me from going up the stairs. Instead, it was pushing me to move to the next room in our basement, which was my father's office. I kept telling it to leave me alone and go away. I was shouting at it at the top of my lungs, and I remember wondering why the rest of my family couldn't hear me screaming. I'm getting really scared at this point. I'm trapped in a room with no other exit, and even though I'm screaming, no one can seem to hear me. Then, suddenly, a super bright swirling light appeared above me. It was almost like a tornado funnel with all this wind and light swirling. It sucked the demon into the light, and I remember having this feeling like it told me to run now. I turned and ran out of the room and towards the staircase leading back towards the rest of the house. The staircase had 10 to 12 stairs, and I remember thinking, I'm going to make it. I'm going to get away from this thing. I had 2 steps left to go when I felt a hand grab my right ankle and start pulling me back into the basement. I was screaming and I was using my hands to try to hold on to the top of the stairs. I took my free leg and kicked with all of my might. I got free and continued running as fast as I could. I ran up the second flight of stairs to our bedrooms. I ran to the room that I shared with my sister and slammed the door. I was standing next to my sister's bed when she awoke with a start. She definitely heard the door slam. She kept asking me what was wrong, but I was so scared that I couldn't speak. I didn't have the ability to make a single sound. I guess I freaked my sister out enough that she went and got my parents. I went and slept in their room for the rest of the night. The next day, I walked into the basement, grabbed the dollhouse, and took it back to where I found it on the side of the road. Whatever it was attached to that dollhouse. The demon, or spirit, whatever it was, never came back. Throughout my whole life, I've always been the type of person to have repeated dreams about things that happened, but I have never had a dream that made me relive this experience. I will say that for the next 10 years at least, I would get a pit in my stomach as I approached that stair where it grabbed my ankle. I refused to step on that step. I would jump it every time. My parents still live in that house, and even now, 35 plus years later, I get scared when I start walking down that staircase. I can bring myself to step on that stair now, but I still think about that hand on my ankle that was trying to drag me down. For starters, I'm a very skeptical person. Pragmatic, and very down to earth, so to say. But what happened to me in my dream kind of changed everything. I was always very close to my grandparents on my father's side. I had a difficult family situation and they were always there for me. Ever since I can remember, me and my sister spent summer holidays on the countryside with my grandparents. When I was 10, we moved in the city near the countryside, and we spent every weekend with them. A few years ago, I moved to another country, and I could only visit my family 2 to 3 times a year. When I was pregnant with my second child, my grandpa got sick. Nothing too serious, but there were some complications, and he did die. I was devastated, and I couldn't even go to the funeral because I was pregnant. My grandma started to get sick shortly after and died the next year. My oldest daughter had some health issues, and we were in the middle of a ton of doctor's appointments, which were hard to get, and we just couldn't miss them. I was very sad that I missed another funeral, but we planned to visit the family in a few months, so that made me feel a little better. But I still felt sad and guilty. One night, though, I had a dream. Usually when I think of death and dead people in my dreams, I get really spooked. But this time I felt really calm in this dream. I dreamt that my father was leading me to my grandparents' house. It was very dark and we came to the door. He said, "You have to go in alone," so I did. There in the living room were my grandparents. The room was exactly as I remember it. It was very light and warm. My grandpa stood up, kind of surprised to see me, but then he hugged me and said, like he always used to, "Hello, my little daughter." And I said, "It's so good to see you. I miss you so much. What are you doing here?" To which he said, "Oh, I was just waiting for Grandma." And then he turned around and I looked at her. She was beautiful. Cheeks red, eyes bright and happy. She just smiled. She was very skinny and old when she died, but now she was so full of life. About the age she was when I was a little girl. I hugged them both, and my grandpa just said, Go, my daughter, we are fine. Then I woke up in the middle of the night. But surprisingly for me, I wasn't scared at all. I called my dad the next day and told him about it, and he told me that he dreamt about a light, a warm light flying and disappearing into the sky. Today, I don't know if my guilt made up that dream so that I could say goodbye, or if my grandparents are somewhere where we're not allowed, and someone let me in for just a second. Either way, I felt better and at ease knowing that they are together. Case 4. The story of Akia Eggleston. When I first began writing this, I truly had no idea just how heartbreaking this particular case was going to be. In this story, there are long stretches of nothing happening. No new information, no developments, until suddenly, there is. Akia Eggleston of Baltimore, Maryland was 22, mother of a 2-year-old daughter with a second baby on the way. There were plans in place for her to move in with her boyfriend and the father of her second child, Michael Robertson. The couple had been saving up to make a down payment on a new place together. However, that would sadly never come to pass. The last time Akia Eggleston was seen was on May 3rd, 2018, when she was seen on a security camera withdrawing money from her bank account at the ATM in Baltimore, Maryland. 22 years old and 8 months pregnant, Akia was in no condition to travel far from her bed, much less her home, as her pregnancy had been determined to be a high risk by her doctor. Akia also had a 2-year-old daughter and was looking forward to her baby shower, where she was planning on revealing the gender of her impending baby, as she had just learned she was expecting a baby boy. What happened to Akia? Why was she suddenly withdrawing money she had been working so hard to save? Are her and her baby okay? All of these questions were left to haunt Akia's family in the days to come, in the wake of her tragic disappearance. No one could ever say that Akia's life had been easy. When she was only 18, her mother passed away. Her biological father was already deceased and had never played an active role in her life. So, her support network came down to her grandparents, siblings, her stepfather, and his new wife. Despite the hardships that she faced, Akia was a resilient young woman who desired to succeed in life. So, what we know. At the time she went missing, she had a 2-year-old daughter and was expecting a boy. Akia had been excitedly planning to have her baby shower on the 7th of May, where she planned to announce the gender of said unborn baby. Although the expecting mother had been placed on bed rest due to her pregnancy being the high risk, nothing could stifle her excitement at becoming a mother a second time. Sadly, she never got to share that moment with her family, nor to celebrate with her friends this wonderful news, because Akia never showed up for her own baby shower. This immediate red flag set her family in motion to begin searching for the 8-month pregnant Akia. One of the most terrifying aspects of this story was that no one really had any information on the whereabouts of Akia, past the security camera footage of her at the ATM withdrawing hundreds of dollars that she had been working to save. So, the assumed date of her disappearance is May 3rd. And that's when all of her social media posts stopped, and it was the last time she had been seen by family or friends. However, the Baltimore PD was reluctant to get involved until June. After Akia's due date came and went, and there were no records of her having given birth, it was the FBI that stepped in, offering a reward for any information leading to the discovery of Akia or her baby. According to Akia's family, the Baltimore PD had to be prompted, or even outright antagonized, in order for them to really do anything. And when the FBI finally stepped in, that was when they finally truly felt that someone was trying to find their loved one. At the time of her disappearance, due to ultrasounds showing that her baby was breech, possibly due to Akia's petite stature, the expecting mother had been on bed rest and had been restricted on the things that she could do. Unable to drive, and without a vehicle even if she could have, it was one of Akia's friends that had taken her to the ATM and then returned her home. Immediately, Robertson was questioned about Akia's whereabouts. As she had been preparing to move in with him in the days leading up to her disappearance, many thought that maybe she had just suddenly done so. But he claimed to have not had contact with her. No one had seen any signs of her moving things from her apartment, but also when approached for any surveillance footage, the complex manager said that the cameras were, of course, broken. Thus, no footage of Akia's building from the time of her disappearance exists. The friend who had given her the ride to the bank later passed away after a battle with a chronic illness, leaving many questions unanswered. When her family tried to bag some items and turn them into the police as potential evidence, they declined to accept them, due to an issue with the chain of custody, meaning that possibly valuable insight and information was completely discounted and never even properly examined. At one point, even after Akia had gone missing, her friends found out that squatters had taken up residence inside of her townhome. This kind of begs the question, how hard had the police even been trying to keep it as a secure crime scene in the days after Akia had been reported as missing? A truly baffling aspect of this case, exacerbated by the broken security cameras, is the furniture, clothing, and other belongings that were removed from Akia's home in the days after her disappearance. No witness reports have ever emerged saying anyone was seen removing things from the dwelling. None of Akia's missing effects have ever turned up in any pawn shops, flea markets, or second-hand stores. So where did Akia's things go? How had no one seen them being removed from what should have been treated as a crime scene? It's certainly not like she was able to move them herself when she could barely walk due to her condition. When she disappeared, Akia did have her wallet, her identification, and her phone with her. Her family repeatedly asked police if they had been able to ping and locate her phone, but the only answer they ever got was that the phone was not found. Akia's stepfather and his wife attempted to get copies of her phone record from the wireless carrier, but were denied on the grounds that they did not have Akia's password. More potential leads, never to be looked into. All of these tragic mishandlings of this case would ultimately come back to haunt authorities and Akia's family in 2023, when after 5 years, the father of Akia's unborn child, Michael Robertson, was arrested and found guilty on 2 counts of murder. Although it was late in coming, Akia's family finally had their closure and had their answers. After Akia went missing, Robertson had left Baltimore and moved to the state of Michigan, where U.S. Marshals found and arrested him on February of 2022. Without Akia or the baby's remains, the case built against Robertson was largely circumstantial. But the prosecution was able to use what they had to build a strong enough case against him that Robertson was convicted on the 2 counts of murder in the first degree, and is now serving the rest of his days in a prison. It turns out, Robertson had been carrying out an affair with another 22-year-old woman the entire time he had been with Akia. And while the arrest and guilty verdict are of some solace to her family, Akia's family still feels the pain of not being able to lay her and her baby boy, Anubis, to rest properly. And that is a pain that will likely never be resolved. This story takes place a few years before the COVID-19 shutdown in New Orleans. My friend, who I'm going to call Cameron for the safety of this story, and myself decided to go to this abandoned hotel next to the main library on Loyola Avenue. We walked all the way to what we assumed was the lobby, and as soon as we got situated, I put my phone flashlight at an angle where we could still see, but it wasn't really that bright. So he and I are just sitting there, and I see this shadow figure in the distance walk across the room. Immediately after that, my friend starts saying that he's seeing demons. After the 10th time of saying that he's seeing demons, I start to feel uncomfortable in the building, and I tell my friend that I'm ready to go. He tells me that he wants to stay for 15 more minutes. I don't know why I said this, but I told him okay. And after 15 minutes, I started grabbing my things and we started heading towards the entrance that we took to get there, and then we left. I never returned to that abandoned hotel ever again after that. Story 5. Hell, Michigan. We all have that oddball friend that draws a kind of delight from the macabre or the darker humor to be found in life. For some people, I am that friend. But in Michigan, there's an entire town of people who absolutely relish in the darker side of things. If you want to visit a truly odd town, then my friends, all you need to do is go to hell. Michigan, that is. For those of you that don't know, there is actually a town in Michigan named Hell, and the residents of this town relish in the town's name, and the macabre association to the infernal. This town is also up for sale. And that's right, my friend, you can buy 1 square inch of the town for the low, low price of, you guessed it, $6.66 per square inch. So, for quite a reasonable sum, you could actually own Hell's half acre. And, of course, a town such as Hell has quite the set of creative business owners. You can stop in at Scream's Ice Cream and eat at the crematory, where you can finally figure out just what a chance in hell a popsicle actually has. You might also enjoy the famous, or perhaps infamous, Gravedigger Sundae. It may be a bit of an odd place, but by all accounts, its denizens are quite friendly and good-natured about the damned name of this town. Beyond all the gimmicky shops and businesses aimed at those tourists that brave perdition to find out what hell is like, the town also pays host to a lot of far more practical activities than eating ironically named sweet treats and t-shirts that might be a bit too on the nose. Apparently, Hell is quite scenic and offers numerous chances to escape into the wilderness via hiking trails. If you're more of a fishing type, then you can rent everything you could possibly need for a weekend on the water, including kayaks or canoes, if you'd rather not wander into the woods. For the wilderness lovers, though, why not book yourself a nice campground? I guess Hell truly does have multiple circles, and some of those circles are much nicer than others. I'd almost be the one to suggest changing the name to the First Circle of Hell, Michigan, but I suppose that's a bit on the wordy side. Anyway, let's look at some of the more interesting and unique things about this quaint and wholesome little town. So, it turns out that Hell is completely unincorporated, located in Putnam Township, Livingston County. Hell has no defined boundaries and no population statistics. I would like to state that that's kind of ironic. So Hell has free reign in Michigan. Always good to know. Also located here is Damnation University, from which you can purchase a diploma. In addition to the lighthearted jokes, owning a square inch of Hell, it is also possible for visitors to become the mayor of Hell for a day. For a small fee, of course. Have you ever wanted to lock in your love and throw away the key? Well, why not do it at the Locks of Love Bridge that spans the Hell Creek River? Because nothing screams romance like padlocking your love to a bridge in hell, and then throwing the key into the river so it may never escape. What better way to proclaim your undying love than by forever attaching it to the infernal damnation of hell? Surely the people who do this have a high success rate in their relationships. For all we know, the 50% of couples that don't get divorced may have sealed the deal in hell. Maybe that's the secret. If you've ever wanted to send your friends and loved one that long-awaited postcard from hell, well, you may as well do it while you're in town. Hell knows when this chance will arise again, after all. I know there's at least a couple of people that I would like to send one of these postcards to. At least one of them would just shake their head and say, yeah, not surprised. There is a theory as to where the name originally stemmed from. It's entirely possible that it comes from the early German settlers to the area who said the area was so schön hell, or so beautifully bright. But only part of the phrase stuck. Go figure. Perhaps it was the old Iceland-Greenland subterfuge, or someone thought if they called it hell, then people would just keep moving on. Being completely honest, I think maybe hell ain't so bad after all. At least, in this context. I was a teenager in the mid-'80s, and my best friend and I were spray painting something in the garage for cheerleading. We left the garage door open just a couple of feet so it could air out as our painted items dried, but completely forgot to close it before we went to bed that night. It was just my mom, my younger sister, and I, as my dad had been killed by a drunk driver 4 years prior. My best friend spent the night, and the next morning as I was waking up, I was in that state where you're still asleep, but you begin to be aware that you're starting to wake up. In that state, I faintly heard the sounds of blue jeans swishing that you hear when someone walks. I thought my mom must be in here for something, in the very back of my mind. Though I remember thinking how strange that was since neither my mom nor my sister wore blue jeans. We were part of a church at that time that taught against women wearing pants. I faintly heard the pants, or my mom, walk out of my room. Immediately, my friend was shaking me awake. "There was a man in your room," she whispered. My eyes flew open and I stared at her. "What?" She continued. "I heard someone come in your room, and I opened my eyes, and there was a man standing there beside the bed watching us. He just left." We listened quietly to see if we could hear anything going on outside of my room. We were afraid to go out there, but also my mom and sister were out there. Pretty quickly I heard my mom's voice, so we went out to the living room. They were standing in the kitchen table where all 4 of our purses were. My mom told us that there was a man in here, and that she caught him going through our purses on the table. She asked him what he was doing, and he stated that he was looking for a friend. And then he turned around and walked out the front door. My mom suddenly ran out the door and called out to the man who was still in our yard, but walking away. "Hey," she yelled. "Did you take anything?" I don't know what prompted my mom to do that, but she was more angry than she was scared. He said no. She came back inside and immediately called the police. We all looked through our purses and found that he had taken my mom's wallet. After looking around, we determined that that was the only thing he had taken. While the police were questioning us, the guy casually rode by on a bike that we later found out he had stolen from a house down the street. They stopped him, my mom identified him, and he was arrested. Apparently he had entered through the garage door that I had left open the night before. The guy ended up getting sentenced to 6 years in prison, since this was not the only house he had broken into. To this day, I will never understand why the guy that broke into our house got 6 years, but the drunk driver who killed my dad 4 years before only got a 2-year suspended sentence. Sometimes justice doesn't make sense. To this day, I have a fear of someone coming into my room at night, usually only when my husband is away. But that's why I took CPL classes and got my license to carry. If my husband goes away overnight, my firearm stays right there with me.